All right, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. A lot of familiar, friendly faces in the room. It's great. I love this town. So I'm going to call us to order. This is TRPA's Advisory Planning Commission meeting. Today's Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. It's 9:33. And we're going to do the roll call to determine our quorum. So I'll go to Tracy for that.
Mr. Oling,
Present.
Mr. Kuchnicki, Mr. Drake,
Present.
thank you. Mr. Drew,
Good morning.
Mr. Ehrlich, Mr. Ferry,
Present.
Mr. Hill. Ms. Jacobson is stuck in traffic. She's on her way. Mr. Judge,
Here.
Ms. Marolis O'Neill.
Here.
We need to turn that sound up. Ms. Cyber,
Present.
Mr. Teixeira,
Top of the morning.
Mr. Hitchcock,
Good morning.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum. We're working on the volume in the room.
Perfect. Thank you, Tracy. And Crystal has just arrived. Just 10 seconds late. Okay. And Tracy, I'm coming right back to you for the remote meeting rules for the day, please.
For members of the public joining us today, to observe the meeting, visit trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, select Advisory Planning Commission meeting, hybrid meeting for today's date. There you'll find a link to the public webinar. To make a comment, raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen when the relevant agenda item comes up. If you've joined by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes. For informational items, public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting during general public comment. For action or possible action items, public comment will be taken before the commission takes any action. To remote APC members, please raise your hand to speak, mute your microphone unless you're speaking, and keep your camera on if you're able. Remote APC members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations.
Perfect. Thank you, Tracy. Slightly shorter, only slightly. We'll keep working on that. Okay, on to item 2, approval of the agenda. Staff, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hester. I will go ahead and deem the agenda approved as it was posted for the record. And I'm going to move us to public interest comments, which is item number 3. Tracy, I don't think I need to go back to you for meeting rules for the day for public interest comments. So I'll just say this is an opportunity for members of the public to comment to the Advisory Planning Commission, preferably on non-agenda items. And we will first go to members in the room and then we'll go online. And I'm going to go in the room. I don't see anyone here. So Catherine, I will go to you for any public interest comments that are online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are no hands raised online to comment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Catherine. I'll take us to item 4, which is our approval of our meeting minutes from our last meeting. We do have a draft set of minutes from our May 14th meeting. It's on page 5 of your packets. Any APC members like to make a change? Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would invite any of my colleagues that might have a correction before I make a comment.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Robert?
She wasn't at the meeting.
Hit it one more time just so that red light comes on. The little. Right.
Oh,
There you go.
sorry. I wasn't at the meeting. I just did notice in the minutes, there was a reference to Reynolds rather than Runnels. So maybe that could be corrected.
Okay, thank you. Any other? I don't see any hands raised online. So Steve, I think we can come back to you.
So, Mr. Chairman, my comment would be that, the phrase tour de force can be applied in many circumstances. I think the minutes that we saw from this meeting, which was a pretty complex meeting, were a tour de force by Tracy and her great work on these. Thank you, Robert, for the Reynolds. I just found 2, there was a apostrophe O missing twice on Lisa O'Daly, but other than that, if anyone didn't go to the meeting and they read the minutes, they would feel like they went to the meeting because it's pretty clear to the chain of discussion and action. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I felt the same way. absolutely thorough. I felt like I was there again when I was reading, which was interesting. Yeah, an interesting feeling. Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes then.
I will move as amended.
Thank you, Steve. Do we have a second?
Second. Eric Young, second.
Oh, Eric Young got the second. We'll give it to Eric. And all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Do we have any objections or abstentions?
Abstain.
Abstain. Robert Ehrlich.
Okay, we have 4 abstentions.
Mr. Chair,
Crystal.
I'd like to also abstain.
Okay, we have 5. So Crystal, Robert, Brian, Garth, and Jason Kuchnicki for the record, Tracy. 5 abstentions. Fantastic. We are moving right along to our public hearings, which is item 5, and I'm going to move us to item 5A. This is on the 2023 threshold evaluation. This is going to be a 2-part presentation. The first part will cover the issuance of the 2023 threshold evaluation. And this item is agendized for possible action. So we'll hear the staff presentation and receive any public comments before we entertain that motion. Information on item 5A1 can be found on page 61 of the meeting materials. And first, I'm going to go to Ms. Reagan to open this item up. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. I have some introductory comments before I turn this over to Dan Segan to do the item. And if you'll indulge me, I may not be able to stay to the end of the Executive Director report. So I'm just going to make some general comments and then dive into the item. I have to head down the hill to Sacramento, where it's not 110 degrees. It's going to only be 89. So not too shabby for Sacramento. So glad about that. Tahoe girl. But I wanted just to open this up to thank the APC. The Advisory Planning Commission is a really vital component of how we do work in the basin under the compact that set up this body, the governing board, our overall structure. Your role is really important. And I know you don't always see me physically here in the room at your meetings because you have the capable leadership of John Hester and our other staff members and our general counsel, Graham St. Michelle. But I do listen to your meetings and I wanted you to know how much we appreciate all your leadership and your hard work and to acknowledge that in the last 6 months, I know you've had some pretty weighty topics. If you think back to just where the December meeting was last year with the Homewood Master Plan, rolling into various items, whether it would be like scoping for the proposed Barton Healthcare Hospital project and zoning work here up at State Line, this initiative, the threshold evaluation, and also the working groups, the Tahoe Living Working Group that your leadership, Mr. Chair, wearing many hats, Brendan, shepherding that with our team and with many members of the community to tackle issues around housing. And don't forget the famous Chewy Swig, the threshold update and initiative stakeholder working group. And we're going to get that band back together pretty soon. And I know you're all involved in that to help us update thresholds, which we'll touch on some of that work today. So your plates are already full in your day jobs. But I just want to say thank you because your role is really vital to the governing board and they appreciate it. And I wanted you to know that you are invited. You should have received an email from Maria Ambler. We're doing a field tour for our governing board in June at our June 25th meeting. We'll take the full afternoon. We're trying to do joint tours with APC and board every season, every summer. Some of you had the chance to go out to Meeks Bay and talk about that restoration last year. This year, we're going to do a tour on the South Shore. We're going to stop at Sugar Pine Village, and the city is going to join us and some other partners to talk about the Sugar Pine project in the city and affordable housing. We're going to go to the Tahoe Keys, and we're going to go also to the Greenbelt project and hear about environmental improvement projects, as well as other initiatives. So I hope that some of you will be able to join us for that. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Tracy or Maria can answer them. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll just tee us up for the next item, but a big thank you to all the hard work and the thought and the care that you're putting into your seats on this commission. We do take it seriously and the board really appreciates it. And so with that, Dan is going to take you into the details of this item. But I did want to call attention on your place at the dais. There should be a copy of our paper. If you haven't yet read the Tahoe in-depth issue for this particular summer, which it's an amazing paper, and a big thanks to the Forest Service and the states of California and Nevada, the Tahoe Fund, the League to Save Lake Tahoe, many partners support this paper. We are still mailing this to 40,000 residents of the basin, part-time and full-time residents, and we put it all around the basin, off the hill in the basin, and we continue to get incredible feedback of just people are starved for content about Lake Tahoe with the decline of some legacy media outlets. So we're proud of it. But the cover is on our threshold evaluation report, and we're going to get pretty technical today. But if you need to scale up as an afterthought of this meeting, give it a read, because it does summarize what we all believe is a generational commitment to the lake and the future of the lake. You know, achieving our mission as envisioned in the compact is a legacy commitment that will go on for many decades. TRPA has been around for 55 years, but let's remember this lake is more than 2 million years old. We're now considered through a new researcher's work in Nevada, just down the hill, Western Nevada College, the oldest lake in North America and the third oldest lake in the world. And so if you think of that continuum of time and the very short space that we are occupying in that, and the challenge that we have, and the somewhat existential threats that we face in this lake, it's a sense of urgency, and we have to act. But we have to also recognize that these standards, many of them were set in the 1980s and will take generations to achieve, and we have to keep making progress. And so I believe the theme of this report is progress, but yet unprecedented challenge. And that is the order of the day of how we're going to tackle them. So I believe this is this will be the 8th report. We've done this 7 times, and we've done it differently, intentionally, in bringing the community more into this, bringing this body of the Advisory Planning Commission into the process, staff, partner agencies, and Dan and Kim Carringer have done an incredible job of broadening the discussions this go round in what will be our 8th report. So I wanted to call that out because I think it's significant. It's not just a report that we put on a shelf and we kind of go about our day to day, and we're actually taking some action moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Segan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Julie. Good to see you here. Appreciate those comments and the thank yous. So hi, Dan. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dan Segan, TRPA staff, and it's my pleasure to present the first of the 2 items that Julie mentioned to you about the 2023 threshold evaluation. First slide, please. So as Julie mentioned, this is our 8th threshold evaluation, and the action before you today that Brendan mentioned is the issuance of the report. So in each of these prior 7 cycles and repeated again in this 8th cycle, we have issued a draft report for comment, and that was about 3 months ago now. During that period, we solicit comments on the content of the report, things that we got wrong, and then we come back to you, explain the changes we made between the draft and the final report, and then ask you to issue that report, or actually seek a recommendation from you to recommend to the governing board that we issue the report. And what issuing the report means in this context is that we lock down the report and that we make no additional changes. So even though it's in a dashboard form now, we no longer produce the 1,000-page document. Once the dashboard is issued by you, we make no changes to that dashboard, even though we continue to update all the underlying data in the monitoring dashboard and in other parts of LT info. Next slide, please. So the threshold evaluation process is central to what we do and to our commitment to adaptive management here in the agency and to continue to learn and to do better. So the evaluation itself is this check process. How are we doing? And then Kim's presentation is going to cover what we do with this report, because the report is only so good in the sense that you take action and you make modifications after that. And so we've divided the presentation where I ask you to issue the report, and then Kim goes and says everything that we've done on top of the report and its findings. Next slide, please. So how did we get here today? So staff and partners in the early part of 2024 developed this report. Then after we'd completed a draft of the report, we sent it off to the Tahoe Science Advisory Council, who organized an independent peer review panel of the report. They gave us comments the comments that you actually see in the evaluation packet online. We then incorporated their comments and suggested edits into the draft version that we released in February of this year. So that version already included all of those comments. Then we issued the report for this public comment period. We got additional public comments, and now we're here today before you, asking you to recommend that we issue that report. Next slide. So just a high-level summary. You've already seen most of these slides. There weren't any huge surprises in this report. It looks very similar to prior reports in that we're making steady progress towards what Julie said, the long-term commitment to environmental restoration and preserving the basin. So about 80% of our standards are in attainment. We see that improving, those are the trends, which direction are we headed? Improving standards outnumber declining standards, and many of them are little to no change, meaning that there's been no change in that, the underlying condition there. And often I'd remind you that is the goal in environmental management. We have many standards that are non-degradation standards. So our goal is just that we have no change there. Next slide, please. You've also seen this, which is the total number of standards in attainment through time. You saw this in the draft release presentation. And what you see is sort of slow, steady progress there. We're not making giant leaps, but these are big long-term goals. We don't expect to make giant leaps here. What we want to see is that slow, steady progress. Next slide, please. I wanted to go into a bit more detail because after the release of the evaluation, we had a number of public comments and conversations with partners about our different types of standards. And Julie mentioned the TUI swig, and that those in the TUI swig will be well familiar with the different types of standards. But if you haven't been subjected to sitting through multiple hours of TUI swigs meetings, some of this may come as a bit of a surprise to you. So the original set of threshold standards was adopted prior to our initial regional plan. And many of the standards included guidance for the framers of that regional plan in things that they wanted to see. So we have a mix of standards, what we call numeric standards. So these are standards with a numeric target. And that's what most people are familiar with when you think of an environmental standard. And for all of those, we can say quite easily, and it's fairly objective in its evaluation process, are we at 100 feet of clarity or are we not? And for each of those, we've said we're in attainment or we're not in attainment. And that's the first two lines of this spreadsheet. The latter two lines, of the table, the latter two lines are where we get, I think, comment and confusion. So we had a number of questions related to the status of our management standards and policy statements. So these are management standards and policy statements don't have a numeric target, but they're broad guidance for the agency to do things or ensure that specific things happen. And in our mind are no less important than many of these numeric target standards. And they're no less important because they all articulate values that many of us care about. And I've shown a couple of these examples on the screen today. And two examples there are in-stream flow standards or the size of forest openings and new forest treatments. So each of these, so the first one is fairly simple. It's that the agency not allow new diversions from our streams. So it seems like a fairly obvious thing, but at the time the standard was adopted, there still were diversions from our streams for numerous reasons. So the directive here in the management standard was to stop that. So each evaluation period we go through and we say, did we allow any new diversions from our streams for any reason? And if the answer is no, then we say that we've implemented that standard. And so for each of those implemented management standards and policy statements, you'll see even you'll see a description of how we went about assessing whether or not we have implemented the guidance of that standard or not. And I think, as Julie mentioned, one of the things that has come up in this evaluation is we would like to work towards all of our standards being numeric targets. And I think that'll be an emphasis over the next 4 years to move away from these more subjective policy type statements and bringing those into line with the expectations of the community. We actually have numeric targets for each of these. But I did want to emphasize that just because there is not a numeric target, it's not that they're not important standards or they're of any lesser value. They still acknowledge important values in the region and require work to implement those. The same is true for the last set of standards there, status not determined. And so these also generally articulate things. They often have underlying monitoring data to them. A good example is many of our standards related to streams, where we don't have a specific target for underlying stream load, but we have a directive to reduce pollutant loads in our streams. And so within the evaluation, we'll report on all of those, but we do not make a status determination because there is no end goal specified in the standard itself. So it's another way that we're presenting the information, but we think in order to have an objective evaluation, we cannot say whether or not it's been achieved or not achieved because there is no specified goal. And again, that's another priority that we've heard going forward, is that for each of these standards, we designate an underlying goal so that when we come back to you in 4 years' time, we'll be able to move all, if not most, of the standards into those upper 2 categories. Next slide, please.
Quick question on that, Dan.
Please.
So since you're sort of like, now we're in the next evaluation cycle already, right? You're already like planning for the 2027.
We are.
So how will that transition occur as you move those to objective standards? How do you foresee that for the next?
So I don't want to steal Kim's thunder,
Okay,
but
We
no,
can
no,
wait.
but if I can indulge an answer. Okay. Oh, so we've been working on how to move those standards over to the specific and measurable target type of standard for a couple years now with the support of the Science Advisory Council. And in the proposed work plan, we're going to accelerate that work in a couple focus areas. So in the 2 focus areas that have come up are the forest health standards and our rec standards. And then we have a suite of recommendations from the Science Advisory Council and from the Threshold Update Initiative Stakeholder Working Group to basically move some of the other standards to the appropriate place within our system. And not to bore you to death, but one of the things that the Science Advisory Council observed about these is that where standards are more like broad goal statements that are not amenable to setting a specific and measurable target, those should be moved either to the regional plan or to the code of ordinances to maintain the agency's focus on them, but to not treat them in the same vein as a threshold standard with a numeric target. Does that make sense?
yeah, that does.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
So with that, I wanted to highlight the 5 areas where we've made changes in the evaluation and just walk through each of those quickly to let you know what's happened. Next slide, please. So the first is our standard for stream habitat condition. And one of the indicators we use there is the composition of benthic macroinvertebrates within our streams. That means the bugs within our streams. So we go out and we sample them every year. And then you may or may not know, we do not have a bug expert on staff. So we send those samples out to be analyzed and to identify the different creatures that are living in our streams. They send us back a complex spreadsheet that basically catalogs those and provides a number of measures of abundance, which is the total number of each. In between the draft evaluation and the final evaluation, the invertebrate expert noticed that when we were calculating our stream condition scores, we were using the adjusted abundance. So there's an abundance that's adjusted for sampling frequency and sampling intensity, or the raw abundance. and that we should have been, or sorry, we were using the adjusted abundance where we should have been using the raw abundance. So we recalculated our stream scores, and you can see that there was some shift. So we have a shift out of the good. And so we added a fair bit of excellent, and then decreased the number of good, and we added a little bit of marginal. So there was an overall shift, not enough to shift the threshold standard attainment call, but enough that it warrant republishing the data on our website. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, that had flow-on effects to other parts of the evaluation. So as you may remember, when we adopted our new SEZ condition index, we did so and it incorporated 10 indicators of an SEZ's health. One of those indicators was the biotic integrity of the condition of the, of the SEZ. And where we had riverine segments or riverine SEZ that included these scores, those needed to be updated as well. And so in the final evaluation, we updated those scores. The result was that the regional SEZ score increased from 7646 to 7656. So that is the condition index is roughly 1% of the overall quality. So if all of our SEZs in the region were perfect, it would be 100. If they were completely destroyed, it would be 0. So it's equivalent to a 0.1% increase in regional SEZ health from the rescoring. So a nice improvement, but nothing. It doesn't materially change the evaluation. Next slide, please. The other area, and I should mention, these are all detailed within the staff summary and the attachments to the staff summary in case you have additional questions on any. So the other area where we published modifications is in the cumulative accounting section of the threshold evaluation. So cumulative accounting tracks all of the development rights within the region. So many of you are familiar. We limit all types of development, and then we track where we stand relative to those. So the development rights can basically exist in one of these 5 states. So they can be in the TRPA pool, they can be issued to a jurisdiction. The jurisdiction could then issue that to a project proponent. The proponent can hold on to that right or then construct it. Or if a development or an existing development has been pulled off the landscape, they can bank that right for future use. We are constantly working with many of your agencies to track these and frequently publish updates to the cumulative accounting within the region. Those are detailed within the evaluation. We made 2 sort of simple mistakes in that we published the wrong table detailing the different types of transfers. So you'll see both the original tables and the revised tables in the packet. And then we updated the overall amount of development within the region to account for when projects were identified as constructed. That's probably the hardest part of this process. We're fairly good at tracking when we give it to a jurisdiction. We're fairly good at tracking when a jurisdiction gives it to an individual. But then there's often a lag between when you get the right to develop your home and when you've actually completed that construction. And those are where the numbers vary most frequently within this process. Next slide, please. So the next is a textual change to the evaluation that we are going to include in the trend interpretation guide. So one of the questions we got was, why doesn't every threshold standard have its own individual page? And part of the reason for that dates back to the threshold evaluation. Well, actually, the peer review from both the 2015 and this existing evaluation is that we often use the same underlying data to evaluate multiple standards. So in order to reduce redundancy and length of the evaluation, where we're using the same underlying data, for example, the example on the screen is the stream scores. So we have 3 standards related to scores, our stream scores, that all use the same underlying data. So rather than publishing 3 individual pages, we aggregate those into a single page so that we avoid you needing to read the same information 3 times. That does sometimes cause confusion. So we've added additional explanatory text to this section to explain you're not going to see 140 individual pages because many of these rely on the same underlying data. So we've aggregated those for simplicity. But within each of those, you'll see individual evaluations of those standards. Next slide, please. So the last of the displays is for inactive standards. So inactive standards mean standards that were either not adopted at the time of the evaluation or were retired. So I know there's a lot of talk of we don't update standards all that quickly, but we do actually update standards more frequently than people think. And one of the examples here is, so this is the Tahoe Yellowcrest standard that we updated in 2024. So prior to that, we had another Tahoe Yellowcrest standard. If you look on the bottom, that was the draft evaluation. And we put NA for the years prior to the new standard being adopted to designate that this standard was not evaluated in past evaluations. And we put NA as well on the old Tahoe Yellowcrest standard in this evaluation. And the idea here is we didn't want to lose those standards because we want to provide full transparency and accounting for all of our standards through times. But we also wanted to say that it wasn't applicable for this evaluation. It turns out NA is a very confusing term for this concept. I see a couple head nods. I think we erred in doing that. So instead, we've landed on dash marks for when it's not evaluated. And then you'll see now a retired notation for the old standard that was replaced in this evaluation. So hopefully that's a little bit more straightforward in terms of what happened with those standards. Next slide, please. I think with that, I'll turn it over to you with questions. Those are the changes that we've made, and appreciate the time.
Changes since you saw us last.
Changes since I saw you last, correct?
Great. All right. Thanks, Dan. Pretty straightforward. It's our time to shine here, APC. So I'll open up the floor. Go ahead and turn your mic on and speak up if you'd like, Robert.
Okay. I'm still very new to this process. I've only been to 3 meetings or so. And so it's hard for me to get my handle on this. I'm Robert Ehrlich. I was looking at a few things on dealing with coverage and floor area and SEZ, stuff like that. So those are some areas I'd been concerned in my previous professional career. So a few questions on that. I see there's trying to look back at previous threshold evaluations. I noticed there's an increase in allowable commercial floor area from around 7 million to 7.3 million. And it'd be nice if I could kind of have some explanation somewhere about how that occurred and over what time frame, and maybe even going further back on that. Another one was, I guess some comes from bonus pools, perhaps. But it looked like, maybe there was 300,000 square feet of an increase from either 2015 to 2023 or 2019 to 2023. I'm also looking at on the, the cumulative counting dashboard, which once I found it was actually interesting. The table 12, which I can't get to pop up right here now, it shows that it had the jurisdictions and how much commercial floor area is in SEZs or other capability levels. And I noticed none of the Nevada counties had any commercial floor area in stream environment zones. And that seemed, the other jurisdictions, like 20% of their commercial floor area was in stream environment zone. So that looked pretty odd to me. And another one on resource utilization, which is kind of dealing with how much impervious land coverage or new impervious land coverage there is. And it looked like it was based on water quality mitigation fee collection data. I was reading through Ms. O'Daly's comment letter. There's a class of public service projects, which I don't know that they would pay a water quality mitigation fee. So they do. Okay. So are changes in pervious coverage related to these public service projects tracked? And are they included in that, those calculations? Are there certain sets that don't pay water quality mitigation fees, like bike trails or something like that, or?
Yes.
So
I think so.
how would, did the resource utilization stuff on the new coverage include new coverage associated for certain other types of projects which may not have paid water quality mitigation fees? And I think that's about it for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. Those are good detailed. Do you want to pause and answer questions later, Dan, or do you want to try to hit some of these now? What do you prefer?
I think we hit it now. If that's,
Yeah.
I had at least 4 individual questions there. So the first related to the total amount of allowable CFA, and Ken will probably help, or do you want to go? I'll just defer to Ken.
I'm Ken Caseman with TRPA, and was responsible for a lot of the cumulative accounting analysis. So I can answer some of the questions, and then we can walk through the in terms of the overall amount of commercial floor area that was reported. Yeah, as Dan mentioned in his presentation, one of the challenges that we have with our with the cumulative accounting in general is really the timing of projects and identifying when things are actually constructed and what's physically on the ground. And as we have done this analysis through time, both our data and the data of our local jurisdictions, all of you, has improved. And so we continually are evaluating the underlying information that we have in order to better assess the information. And so part of those changes are really better identifying the existing development that's on the ground. And so the underlying change that you're seeing there between the evaluations relates to where we have done verifications of existing development and identified more floor area than what was previously reported. And so an example is in the 2011 threshold evaluation and the 2012 regional plan update, we did a LiDAR flyover of the whole basin to estimate commercial floor area. Is one of the things that we did with that, using the envelope of buildings as our calculation for floor area. Because we just didn't have as much information about what was existing on the ground. But as we've done more verifications and as we've tracked information better, we've identified some error in that analysis. And so, for an example, you may have a 2-story building or a building that has two floors of commercial floor space, and that building envelope would have only given us the footprint of the building itself. And so we may have identified more commercial floor area because of that 2nd story, or other areas where we just overestimated. And so that net change that you're seeing is really the result of just better data for existing. All of the new commercial floor area that is constructed and has been constructed since the 2012 regional plan has been done with allocations, conversions, or transfers. And we have that tracked in our Lake Tahoe info platform. And so, that information is tracked on a regular basis. And again, the differences between what is approved but not constructed and constructed is really what you see as making changes to that data. In terms of the question about commercial floor area and SEZs, again, our regulations do not allow new development in stream environment zones. And so really what you're seeing there is legacy development that was constructed before, TRPA came into existence. And really because of the dynamics of some of the different counties, most of the land, on the East Shore was not, it was not developed and is not available. And so really when we're talking primarily about SEZ and commercial floor area in SEZ or even tourist accommodation units, you're primarily talking about lakefront, restaurants and stores, and then things along the, where you see like the Motel 6 and other properties that were in the stream zones as well. And so a lot of, the focus of the IP is really to remove that development. But there's a prohibition on new development in SEZs, so you're not going to see any new commercial in those areas.
Just follow up on that. On the SEZ, I would think that the, casino core area, there were sections of SEZ through that. And there's probably other SEZ sections that are not at the lake that have been developed and are in the Nevada counties. So it's just some explanation for that would be useful.
Sure.
The stuff on the commercial floor area, it would almost be useful. There still is some available commercial floor area. Okay, so as you refined after the LiDAR, the existing commercial floor area, and did that increase with the LiDAR or decrease after that was done, like in 2011 or subsequent to that? So I'm wondering, what's the impact of that on, then do you reduce the allowable commercial floor area that hasn't been developed as you find that there's actually more, or maybe there's more? And it'd be nice, and just in terms of the threshold evaluation being something where people can look over time and then see how things have changed. It would be nice if there's like maybe by each threshold and evaluation, a kind of list. Okay, here's where we thought we were on the commercial floor area, at least on the existing potential, how much is in SEZs, and then show that through time and have some explanation of that. So that would help people understand basically, okay, if there's been an increase in the total allowed, well, maybe it's, it's an account, it's from the LiDAR stuff, but that would be useful to get a sense from the threshold evaluations we're moving. Is it because we're increasing the amount of allowable? We've redefined what's existing, that type of stuff.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could just build on that, and really a big shout out to Ken Caseman and our entire research and analysis team that have been doing such heavy lifting on this. One point I just wanted to make for the benefit of some of the newer members of APC, just kind of scaling it up. Good questions, Robert. I think it's important to note that under the 1987 regional plan, we haven't even hit the allowable commercial floor area that was allocated in 87. So we're under the initial amounts. Just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that. And then in the 2012 plan update, additional CFA commercial floor area was allocated and analyzed, but only to be used after the 1987 square footage has been used. So we're well under the standard, or I guess I should say the allotment. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear for newer members. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
So we haven't even tapped into the new pool that was released in the 2012 regional plan.
John Hester, for the record, just to add more to that explanation, and I think I explained this to Robert when we did our orientation. I think it was 2018, you guys and the board adopted changes to our development rights system so you can move them between categories. And Ken can tell you this better than I can, but we've seen a slight change from other categories, CFA and TAUs, to housing, which was why we did that, because it was a mitigation measure for the 2012 regional plan, because housing is such a problem. So you're right, we really have a lot of things, moving parts there, so we probably could improve the way we explain all that.
Yeah, just so that if somebody wants to look through time, they can understand the explanations when they're, if they're seeing a increase in number or something like that. But yeah, the SEZ stuff, it would be nice if that could be, it doesn't seem credible.
Yeah, we'll revisit. It looks like that may be an error in the table.
Okay.
So we'll look at that. Just to answer the last question on the water quality mitigation fee. So water quality mitigation is paid for every additional square foot of coverage added. And so it's, I think the fee is $1.86 per square foot of new coverage that's added. And again, generally, there is no additional coverage that is allowed in stream environment zones, with very limited exceptions like the bike trail and EIP projects. And when you have those types of projects that would be adding coverage, even if they are public, projects, there are specific requirements for 1.5 to 1 mitigation in order to implement those projects. But generally, when there is water quality mitigation funds added, it's because there's new coverage that is allowed through either the Bailey Link capability system or under IPES. And so that's what you see when those funds are coming in. I don't know if that fully answered the question or.
I mean, on the new coverage, as long as there's, if there's new coverage, but it's, you're showing, okay, but we've mitigated that by removing 1.5%, not percent, times coverage in another location, or to account for that, that would be okay to, if you could show that. But yeah, I think they're just the feeling that all new coverage is, in SEZs or any other land capability units is shown, but you could do net new or new, and you could show maybe you're having a net decrease because of that, but just making sure all projects are included, including ones that might not pay a water quality mitigation fee or be shown as commercial floor area.
Yes, so that table actually does include both coverage that was removed through EIP projects, any mitigation and coverage that was retired as a result of permitting activity, plus new coverage that was added. And again, you'll see in the table, the vast majority of coverage added was in lane capability 4 and above, where it's high capability land. All of the other areas were reducing coverage, mostly through EIP or retirement, type projects. In terms of the, we can certainly expand some of that reporting and talk through that in more detail. And again, just to be clear, so as I mentioned the LiDAR before, we use the water quality mitigation fund as a way to estimate changes in coverage through permitting activities and removals from EIP. And what we've generally been doing is every 10 years, we've been trying to do a LiDAR flyover that actually gives you that coverage analysis at a point cloud level for the region. But because it's expensive, we haven't been doing that for every evaluation. So we were using the mitigation fees as a proxy in between those LiDAR flyovers. And so the idea is probably for the next evaluation, we will have updated LiDAR and we will do another round of evaluation using high resolution aerial imagery and LiDAR in order to assess actual coverage. And then we would likely do the fees again for the next evaluation.
I did see that the costs were a factor in not being able to do LiDAR. Do you expect, so the last one was still the 2011, 2012, or was there a LiDAR since then?
There was a LiDAR, I believe in 2018 or 2019.
And is that data has been incorporated into this then?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
we use that for the 2019 threshold evaluation.
Okay, it'd be nice to see if you can commit perhaps to LiDAR for the next evaluation then.
Yeah, you know, those flyovers are generally a partnership of
Right.
numerous entities, and if we can pull our money together and have it flown and the data analyzed, we would certainly do so. You know, as part of the partnership.
Okay, thank you very much, and apologize again. I'm kind of late to this, but just hard to find my way through all the documents.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Ken. Anyone, other members here? I don't see, let me look. I haven't seen hands online. Nope. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Steve Bashir, representing Tahoe Transportation District. So a couple things. I don't know if it's possible to put together a quantification of the benefits of environmental redevelopment, since we put a lot of emphasis on that. You could probably weave through the document and pull out pieces that might relate to that. But it seems like that's something that would be good to have to share with the community and the people of the basin and the investors. So that was just one comment that Robert's comments triggered a couple things. There's quite a bit of CFA that's offline, sort of not really being used. It's not a big concern necessarily. I appreciate the explanation that, you know, we're well under what the CFA actually allows. But, you know, when you drive around the region, there's just a lot of properties that are offline, which is a nice way of putting it. The other thing that struck me during the presentation, and thank you, Dan, you're always so very clear about these subject matters. We hear a lot about the Science Advisory Council. It would be nice to have maybe an interaction opportunity between the APC and the Science Advisory Council at some point in time, including any comments that they would have about the work they did and their impressions overall of the threshold evaluation. At some point in the future, if we could maybe, Julie, schedule something like that, I think would be worthwhile. So those are my initial thoughts, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Jason?
Good morning, Jason Drew for the record. Dan, one of the things that I've been thinking about and I've had a hard time trying to quantify is, you know, through TUI Swig, we worked over a number of years on the standards that you mentioned earlier, and there were changes to them, and functionally we had standards that you just couldn't measure before. How much of you know, that slight trend and improvement that's occurred over the last 8, 12, 14 years, how much of that do you think is attributable to the fact that we now have some standards that we can better measure than we could before versus there being an actual change on the ground?
So it's a good question. I actually think the changes that we've made to the standards have had a negative impact on the total number of standards in attainment. So if you think about the SEZ standard, we hit the last SEZ restoration standard and then adopted a new one that was out of attainment. So whenever I'm explaining that graph to people, I always try to remind them of, like, I don't know that the goal is 100% attainment. I think it is, you know, many of them are long-term goals that we're working towards, but once we hit them, we often set a new one. And I think the same thing is true for, you know, the AIS standards that we talked about, where we removed 6 standards that couldn't be evaluated and replaced them with 2 standards that are out of attainment. So I think in many ways, the actions, you know, there's no improvement in the number of, or the percent of standards in attainment in the last, between 2019 and this evaluation. And I think part of that is we're adding new standards. And as we do, we're adding them, and they're like the other threshold standards, they're ambitious goals for something to achieve. So they're almost by definition out of attainment right now.
So the reality is, it might be flipped of what I said, which is the on the ground improvements are actually better than what the trend is showing, because we've created new standards that you can measure that have put us out of attainment. We're doing the right thing, but in a metric, if someone just looked at 1 year's evaluation, they may take the wrong impression away of whether something is getting better or not. And what I'm getting at is the difference between understanding the technicalities and science behind the standards and what the public sees. And I want to make sure that if that trend is actually better than what the trend line shows, or there are nuances to the threshold evaluation that we need to put in layman's terms, that we do that.
Yep. Go ahead, Nate.
I was gonna actually ask Tracy to go back a couple slides, because I think to Jason, if we go to that table that shows in attainment versus non-attainment versus non-evaluated. So if we had, sorry, maybe one more or two more. So this one, so the status not determined, that's the one where we've seen significant progress in reducing that number through the update process. But as we do that, sometimes we add them to the attainment and other times we add them to the non-attainment category. So to your point, it's a far more nuanced picture when you're actually diving down into the evaluation and understanding what's happened there.
That's great. And I guess my recommendation would be, it's just for leadership as we communicate this, making that really clear, because I think you could take the wrong impression away from the threshold evaluation as to what's actually really happening. And overall, we are trending in a evaluation. The progress of evaluation is getting better. The results of that is it may in the short term show that we are not in as much attainment as we want to be. But I would rather, it's that nuance of, I would rather have status not determined be a very small number and not be in attainment, but trending in the right direction, than status not determined be a big number and we are telling everybody everything's great. So in general, I think we are moving in the right direction. How this is presented to the public, I think is important, because my guess is the average resident or visitor to Tahoe will not understand this.
Can I just go back one more slide to make this point? Because I think it's actually, sorry, two more. Because I think it's also a conversation that we may have at the Threshold Update Initiative Stakeholder Working Group, and it relates to how we communicate based on this slide here. Because, so this is a slide that we've included in just about every threshold evaluation. And the left-hand side is what Jason's talking about, total number of standards in attainment, non-attainment. And that's what we often show as, in the next slide, the trend through time, total number of standards in attainment. And that is probably a far less important metric. And then if you go back to the prior slide, the individual trend within standards, right? And the part which is for any individual metric, whether or not we are in attainment or out of attainment right now, are we trending the right direction or are we not? And so that, in our internal discussions, we focus far more on, okay, we have 6 standards that are still declining. What can we do there, rather than the total number of standards in attainment, which isn't necessarily subject to management action. And I think, to Jason's point, doesn't tell the whole story. So I think this is a slide we may consider modifying how we present and how we talk about going forward.
I appreciate that, Dan. And the reason that I bring this up is I get very frustrated by individuals who comment to this group and others, and often focus on things that are nebulous and negative. And the reality is in the totality of what's happening, we're moving in the right direction. And there's far more positive environmental gains happening than what you would be led to believe by the comments that we get in front of this group and the governing board and the committees by certain members of the public, and often what's reflected due to maybe lack of understanding within the media. So I appreciate, that what Jeff sends out regularly, Tahoe in depth. But I think it's incumbent on this group and others, we need to make sure we're communicating this, because it is complicated. The basin is a complicated system, and trying to understand where we are at any given time and the trends that are happening and where improvement is occurring is often difficult for, I think, the layperson to understand. And so I think these conversations are important. The threshold update is important. And then how we communicate that out is critical, because otherwise, if you're only paying attention to certain inputs in the system, you would not take this away.
Good comments, Jason. Thanks. Other members? Robert?
Just a Robert Ehrlich, just to follow up on those ideas, which I think were quite good. The ones on the chart there, are most of the standards ones that have not changed over the threshold evaluations? What I'm trying to think is, for some of these, it might be nice, again, to look at a longer time frame. And let's say there's the 6 declining ones. Okay. Maybe start, if those are consistent from previous evaluations, just having like a graph or something showing, okay, through the first 4 threshold evaluations, those got better and now they're declining. So that would highlight, so this, I'm showing, my feeling is on this is since the last evaluation, they're declining or improving. But showing a trend over a longer period of time would be useful as to highlighting which ones are ones we, even if it's still improving, but it went way down, or, it just improved a little, something showing that would give information that might be useful. I mean, that might be a lot of graphs, but that would show more of the trend analysis trends. Thank you.
Good comment. Others? I'm looking online as well.
May I, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Drake, go ahead.
Hey, great presentation. Thanks for addressing some of the conversation topics and comments that came up when you first presented this to us, Dan. I think that the devil's in the details here, and this is, like Jason said, really complex to communicate. I mean, we're all sitting here focused on it, and it's still a lot to wrap your brain around. And I think the thresholds are so central to why TRPA exists that this is probably something that deserves, a public event where people could go, say, station to station and understand the thresholds. And I would love to see like a staff person and a science advisory council person at each table to kind of speak from different perspectives about the different, why we're measuring what we're measuring, where we're at, what's being done. I think it's so central to the credibility of TRPA as an agency that it should be more than just a publication. There should be some real outreach. And maybe something like that is planned, but it's difficult to, to pull it all together for all but a very few focused and dedicated people.
Thank you, Kevin. Dan heard you. He's writing. He's got plans. Do you want to comment, Dan? Kim's got plans. Yep. Kim might cover some of that, I'm going to guess, in her. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Kevin. Mr. Young, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Thank you. I completely agree with Kevin's comments we just heard, and I think this might be part of the natural evolution of this whole process that we heard about here in the beginning, that we all know about. This is the 8th iteration, I believe. Been doing this for a while. Changes a little bit every time, gets better a little bit every time. And the whole question of audience has never really, in my experience of these discussions, come up before today. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. Who is, the intended audience for this document? And it's always kind of been us. And now I think the audience is clearly expanding in this new time, or this new iteration, or with the APC now, suggesting that the audience is not just technical people and TRPA people and interested scientists. It's the entire community of the basin, I think, is the expanded audience now. And that's a difficult trick to pull off. I often have to write documents that are somewhat technical, and I need help making them more public accessible and public um, uh, uh, aware and so forth. I'm not good at that, and I have to reach out and have people take my documents and make them a multi-audience document. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. I don't know that we have to make an enormous effort this time, but we're going to do this threshold evaluation again. And I think a little bit of evolution today towards going towards a broader audience will hopefully lead us to a point where the next time we're doing this, it's just taken for granted that the audience for this document is the entire Tahoe community. I really appreciate this conversation. It's not what I expected today at all. But as usual, I really appreciate the comments from APC and the really difficult hard work of staff. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Seeing no others, I just had two kind of questions on format, Dan, and maybe Kim will touch on some of this, but one thing you said, Dan, that resonated with me was like, after we sort of recommend this today, it's fixed in time. So just a question for the public on, because this is different than when you just print something and you say, this is the final one. And it's, I think for the public, easier to see that there's integrity built around that and it won't change. So what's TRPA's sort of integrity policy on, now this thing is fixed, even though it's kind of locked behind a computer screen? Just from a public trust standpoint, I mean, is there anything, can you build that in, or can you make statements about that, or just to try to build more public trust in the process where there's no behind the scenes gaming the system, if you will? Like, how do we lock this thing in time? And just provide that exclamation point on the integrity piece. I don't know. It's kind of, maybe that's a weird question, but that's what I thought of when you said that.
No, I don't think it's a weird question at all. I think, so we publish both the draft and then the final, and we lock them through time. So the website is set up so that no changes can be made after it's published. And I think the example of that, and, in some ways, if we were able to manipulate it, a lot of the cumulative accounting questions that Robert asked about and that Ken explained, we would have gone back and updated the 2019 cumulative accounting to address the issues that we identified after the fact. And rather than doing that, we come to you today with a detailed explanation of where we think cumulative accounting went wrong in 2019 and what we think the actual values were at that time. And I think that's rather than, you can imagine some version of like, okay, we're just going to correct it and go back and make ourselves look good so that the continuity is easier to see for a broader audience between 2019 and 2023. And rather than doing that, what we've done and what I think we're going to continue to do is we will leave the 2019 evaluation up there. But then if you look at it's attachment C there of your packet. So there's what we call it a detailed breakdown of the changes to what we believed the actual cumulative accounting would have been in 2019. And we do that in lieu of actually changing the last one. And we provide an explanation for each of those. So this was something that was still in a jurisdiction pool that was not yet reported to us, something that we thought was constructed, but actually was not. And so I think that's going to be our intention to try to shine a better light on these and the corrections that we make. Because I think just because the report is issued doesn't mean that we're living with those, to the extent that there are mistakes embedded, we're not living with those for life. We're committed to actually updating those and ensuring that we're using the best data, but we're also committed to the integrity of the document as it is and recognizing that, sometimes there are mistakes in past evaluations. And actually in this one, just to give another example, there's a cushion plant community on the top of Frail Peak. These are very low lying plants that we published an analysis in 2015 of that suggested there had been large declines in that community. And the researchers we'd gone back to the researchers this year as part of the evaluation and said, can you reanalyze the data for us? What do you think's happening? And they said, not only do we think the community is stable, we think the prior analysis suggesting decline was off. And rather than trying to go back and say, oh, in 2015 and update our 2015 evaluation, we just leave that as a point in time. And we've updated with the more recent analysis in this one. And if you read the current analysis, it says, we think we erred in 2015 in saying the community was in decline. And actually subsequent analysis indicates that it was probably stable at that time too.
I think that's a good answer. Yeah, I like that approach a lot. I think that's a good thing to mention, even in your governing board presentation. Is just something to kind of weave in. My last question, and this was in some of the public comments, is it's sort of along the same lines as about the format, is like, have we lost? And I think last time you were here, you told us that the pendulum had swung from, in the last evaluation, from the 1,000-page report to like just the dashboard. And I think in this version, your attempt was to create not a hybrid of those things, but to provide more context. And so maybe you've already addressed this, but there's still some of the public comment was saying things like, have we lost like the moment in time and some of the context and the descriptions? I don't know if you have a comment about that, just to try to address some of that, but I was sort of thinking the same thing. Like, I know you're trying to hone in on the right, and what is the right format for this thing, which is not easy. So I definitely appreciate that, but I don't know if you want to say anything in response to some of those comments.
The only thing I'd say, and this is Dan Segan again, is that it's something I think that we need to continue to work on. So it's also something that the peer reviewers highlighted and was a conversation with the Science Advisory Council, because we had numerous peer reviewers that sort of got lost in the morass of data that we present. And I think Eric hit it well. Like, we've not landed on what exactly the audience is for the report. I think we're trying to serve multiple masters here. For the peer review, they were very interested in all of the data, and that it's very hard to present all of the data and have something that's accessible for a general audience. And I think we're going to continue to struggle to find that balance and develop products that I think we're going to have to develop multiple products is basically where we've landed. We're going to have to develop products that are accessible for a more general audience and continue to develop products that are really geared towards a more scientific audience that is pretty deep in the weeds of the analysis and whether or not we did the right statistical test.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. More work, and probably some of what Kim's going to tell us too. Okay, great. I think we're good here. Let's go to public comment on this item, and then we'll try to wrap this one up. So this is going to be public comment on item 5A. For those participating online, go to trpa.gov. In the calendar, click on APC meeting for today. There you'll find a link to our public webinar. And for members of the public, now is your opportunity to either come to the podium if you're in the room, or raise your hand on the Zoom screen, or dial *9 on your telephone. You'll be called upon and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Looking in the room, we have no public comment coming to the podium, so we will go to any public comment online for Zoom participants on item 5A. This is your opportunity. And I'll go to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are no hands raised online to comment.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Catherine. Not comment. Okay. Final thoughts before we go to the motion that's on the screen. And if not, I would definitely entertain a motion from someone.
Just a question, any of the potential issues we discussed, will that result in any changes to the final? Or is the final, as have been presented, what we'll be voting on?
Yeah, I think if the commission would like to stipulate some change, you can do that as part of this motion. If that answers your question.
Would have to be quite specific about the changes?
Yeah, just
Can I suggest at least one amendment to the motion? Can we amend it subject to approval that we correct the CFA land capability table that Robert mentioned in his earlier comments?
This
Yeah.
is, this is John Hester for the record. I think, Robert, to your question, some specific changes you all want us to make, like Dan just mentioned, yes. There are other things like you'd like to see us meet jointly with the TSAC or something like that. That can go into the staff report. So there's two venues for moving.
Okay, so Robert, are you saying you'd like to make the motion with an amendment?
I'm looking at, were you looking at, was that table 12 or?
Subject to correcting table 12, that's
Okay.
correct.
Is there any more discussion you could add about the change in commercial floor area over time? I don't know that is a correction of a table, but something that kind of highlights how we got, over time, how we got to the new number and where the additional existing or the additional available CFA comes.
I think that is, are you say, or is this suggestion that we expand the description of the detailed breakdown of changes of development right types in attachment C?
Okay, I haven't finished attachment C yet. Sorry.
That's
So,
Sorry, I just have my,
sorry.
no, I can pull it up.
Of the 75 of today's presentation, or?
Page 75 of the agenda packet.
Okay, that one I have. Okay. Sorry.
Do you want to jump in, Hitch?
Ken, I just had a clarifying question. The increase in CFA is not technically new CFA, it's just existing CFA that was not captured previously, like a two-story example, correct?
Yes, again, Ken Caseman for the record. Yes, it's primarily existing CFA that we have identified that wasn't previously counted. And what I wanted to share is we are working on some additional tools and dashboards that present the information that underlies all of these analyses. It's sort of separate from the cumulative accounting requirement of the threshold evaluation itself, which is sort of a point in time, but gives that analysis through time picture that you're asking for. And that's we've created a dashboard that shows that information. Right now, it doesn't have the breakdown by land capability or any of that. It just shows the high level totals. But our intent is to build that out as sort of a standalone package outside of sort of the cumulative accounting. Again, that's sort of this point in time. And so we are publishing that. It's actually already published. We just haven't. I don't recall if we included that link in the packet. It is in the packet.
That link is on page 74 in the packet, and then the detailed explanation of changes between 2019 and today that I referenced during the earlier conversation is the table that follows that link on page 74 and 75 of the packet. And I think your suggestion is to add additional text to describe how we arrived at those changes in a more detailed description.
Yeah, I was also looking to go a little bit back. This one looked at corrections sort of from 2019. I was trying to have a little more of the history of CFA shown somewhere in the threshold. I mean, you have some other
Sure.
tables like oops. Well, I was seeing it on the dashboard. Maybe there was a table that had over time, I think it was coverage in different land capability classes or something like that. I'm wondering if there could be a table showing allow CFA different status through the different threshold evaluations. You know, going back to, not trying to correct old ones, but just showing, okay, here's where we were there, here's where we are now in terms of, you know, here was. So I'm not phrasing it quite right. Maybe you could suggest.
Yeah,
No.
we do have, and we can pull together, you know, what each cumulative accounting evaluation has stated for, you know, CFA through time. Again, with the caveat that what we're finding is some of those figures that were, you know, all of this is estimated,
Right.
and we've identified error in some of that we're working to correct. And so the dashboard that we're producing has those corrected figures that go all the way back to 2012.
Okay.
And what we're working on, but we can certainly pull together an analysis that shows all of that.
And the text that describes why some of the numbers had been corrected would be very useful. So, I mean, I don't want to be trying to show, oh, here's some numbers that were bad. But yeah, so maybe I'm trying to phrase it correctly, but maybe you were talking about a correction to, was it table 12?
Yeah, maybe I'd take another shot at amending the
Okay,
motion.
Thank you. You'll
No
do better
worries,
at that.
because I believe, so the amended motion would be subject to correcting the errors in table 12 and showing a version of table 12 through time and what was reported in the past evaluations with an explanation of changes.
For the CFA, and then for the table 12 might have been more was table 12 showing the
It's CFA
Yes.
and land capability.
ability? Okay.
Is that
That was the one which showed there was no CFA
in the
SEGs
Nevada
in
account?
Nevada. Okay.
Correct.
All right. I think your language is good. I don't know if I could
Yeah,
repeat it
let's-
as well as you could.
Graham, can we?
Sorry.
Yeah, this is Graham. I don't think you need to restate that in some form right here. I think you could just say subject to the discussion that we've had today here between Dan Segan and Mr. Ehrlich. I think if everyone kind of agrees and you don't want to modify that, I think a lot of this discussion is going to be too hard to really put down in a motion. I thought Dan said it best a few minutes or a few seconds ago, actually. So
That sounds great.
Okay. And
Okay.
just the discussion regarding CFA through time and the
On table 12.
analysis of SEZ by jurisdiction for CFA.
That sounds good. So Robert, will you then say, I'd like to make a motion and read that and then just say subject to the amendments of table 12 like we discussed?
you'll be fine. Give it your best effort. It's all on the record. We've
It's not
got
going
it.
to be good. It's not
Yeah,
gonna be
it's fine.
good. Okay. I move to recommend the governing board adopt resolution 2025 issuing the final 2023 threshold evaluation report subject to inclusion of modification of table 12 regarding SEZ in jurisdictions in, I guess that was commercial floor area, and
Take legal counsel advice on.
Yeah, just say subject to the conversation with Dan.
subject to other conversations on showing the progression of the CFA numbers through time.
Good. Is
I don't know.
that okay, Graham?
Yeah, and I'm looking to Dan, staff, good, okay. I think
That
that's
all?
good.
Is that okay?
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Crystal. Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'm gonna go to Tracy. I'm gonna go to Tracy for a roll call vote on that motion, please.
Mr. Judge,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. McNamara, do see you online, Mr. McNamara, if you'd like to unmute. We'll come back round. Ms. Marolas O'Neill,
Yes.
Mr. Hitchcock,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Ehrlich,
Yes.
Ms. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Teixeira,
Yes.
Mr. Kuchniki,
Yes.
Mr. Orling,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Drew,
Yes.
Ms. Cyber,
Yes.
Ms. Ferris is not here, Mr. Ferry.
Yes.
Mr. McNamara, one more time. He's hiking in the UK, so. Good effort
That's
for calling.
Fair
it.
that he remains muted, I suppose.
Mr. Chair, that motion passes.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you all for that discussion. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. And I'm going to move us on to the second part of this item now, which is item 5A.2. This is the 2023 Threshold Evaluation Engagement Process and Recommendations Report. Bye, Julie. Thank you. This part of it is informational only. We won't have to do the motion thing at the end. Information can be found on page 233 of the packet, and I'm going to go to Ms. Carringer for this presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. I'm really excited to round out this presentation. It's fairly brief, but it's going to build really well on some of the comments and questions you all had for Dan on the last part of the presentation. The comments from Jason Drew and Kevin Drake and Eric Young at the end there about communicating and engaging with the public really resonated with me very much because it was really important to us when this threshold evaluation came out that we communicate it out as best we can and not just communicate it, but have a two-way conversation with stakeholders about it so that it doesn't just sit on the shelf. We really get an opportunity to discuss it and then use it to inform how our priorities how our priorities are set at TRPA going forward. So you might recall Dan and I were here back in March and we did that flip chart discussion exercise where we asked you all, what were your key takeaways from this threshold evaluation after Dan gave the presentation? What were your key takeaways? What areas are really concerning to you? And what really do you think we should focus on at TRPA in the next few years to address it? So we had that conversation here. There's some detailed notes on that in the staff report on the outcomes of that conversation, but we had that conversation also with our governing board. We did a session with our environmental improvement program partners, and we did a breakout session with the public as part of the governing board agenda item. We also did specific outreach, targeted outreach to stakeholders that provided comments to see if they wanted to do their own session, which Jan and I did a couple of those with some stakeholders. So we summarized all of that in your packet. There's summary conversations from each of those discussions, and then we summarized it all in a short recommendations report so that we could have that cataloged as to how it informs our work plan going forward. So I'm going to give you a brief summary of the themes that we heard from those conversations, and then the proposed strategic priorities that we're going to take to our board for approval in a couple weeks, the end of the month. So I think this is how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 key buckets that we put these themes that we heard from those discussions in. And the first one was the EIP, the Environmental Improvement Program, is working. We heard a lot of support from the investment we've put into that program over the last 30 years because it's really showing that threshold progress over time. The whole goal of the Environmental Improvement Program is to accelerate threshold attainment and put money and capital investment on restoration, redevelopment so that we can achieve those goals that we set out back in the 80s and on the threshold evaluate or on the thresholds. Many lauded us being able to achieve that SEZ threshold and then setting an even bigger target for ourselves. And we just, as part of the TIE steering committee and through our EIP partners, we really just talked about the need to continue to focus and invest making sure we're investing in the multi-benefit projects that are going to give us the most bang for the buck and really take a fine-tooth comb to our EIP list and continue to deliver those projects. So on those core programs, watershed restoration, aquatic invasive species, and sustainable recreation, transportation, all of those. So that was one key bucket of feedback we heard. Next one is lake clarity and trends. The trends are concerning. We heard that across the board. stakeholders emphasize the need to better understand the diverging trends in summer and winter clarity. I'm reading off of the report that's in your packet, and why clarity isn't necessarily improving despite us meeting the targets of the TMDL and those pollution reduction targets. We're meeting those that we set more than a decade ago. So there's got to be more going on in the system that's affecting our clarity numbers. So many felt it still needs to be a top priority to investigate and inform our work going forward. Next one was accelerating forest health and restoration and preparing for wildfire. Again, a theme through all of the stakeholder groups was it is great to see the work on the ground happening, the forest restoration. We're nearing 100,000 acres of treatment since the EIP began. And I think you can see that on the landscape. And people said, don't let up. It's working. It helped with the Caldor fire. Continue. Don't take your foot off the gas on that one. However, what about the built environment and home hardening and making sure people are prepared? Is the population prepared? Are we being resilient to wildfires? So that was a key theme we heard here. And evacuation planning, of course, you've heard that a lot through public comment. There's a lot happening on public evacuation planning outside of this agency. And is it being communicated effectively to the public when they comment here and are asking about it? Next bucket was sustainable recreation and transportation. Again, people highlighted there's still congestion, there's overcrowding, there's safety concerns, particularly in our popular recreation corridors, Emerald Bay, SR 28. People would like to see us continue to move on local transit, regional transit, and making sustainable solutions to visitor management in those areas. I'm happy to say there's progress happening right now in both of those. You see a new reservation system just rolled out at Sand Harbor. We see a pilot shuttle, a pilot project with a shuttle and new parking strategies for Emerald Bay this summer. So it's great to see those coming online. And I think there really is a lot of attention from our elected officials, from our partner agencies on continuing to advance those corridor plans. So it's great to see the progress there, and it's a theme we definitely heard. Lastly, we talked about this a lot in Dan's presentation. We heard across the board, continue to modernize thresholds in your reporting. We've made some progress there. You've all approved recent threshold updates over the last year. We really want to continue to take that forward, make progress. So, and there was a lot that we heard from these conversations, and it's detailed in your packet. I won't cover all of them in detail. These were kind of the big trends and buckets. On the next slide, we took a lot of the feedback that we heard through that process and ran it through a filter of really, okay, what's appropriate for our role at TRPA and our authority on what we should prioritize based on that feedback? What actions best complement what our partners are doing through the EIP, so we're complementing and we're leveraging all the work, not duplicating? What actions get us the most regional plan and threshold gain, right? And then I put that superhero icon of what can we do within our current budget and staffing capacity. Our staff is our asset, our strongest asset is our people. We can't overwhelm them with everything. So we have to be strategic on what can our staff get behind, are stoked to do, and make the most benefit for the agency. So that's a consideration that is definitely priority for us. So on the next slide, I'll show you where we landed as far as our strategic priorities that we're proposing for our next fiscal year work plan. Here you see our mission and vision. These strategic priorities drive and support all of those. Before we had three. We had restoration and resilience, transportation, and housing. We decided to break up restoration and resilience because that really was a very big category of the entire EIP, and focus it more for two focused work plans on the forest health and wildfire, lake and watershed restoration. Transportation and housing have multi-year work plans that were still a very big priority that we heard through the threshold evaluation we want to continue working on. So those are carried over from last year. And I'll go through each one of these quickly. Next slide. On the forest health and wildfire strategic priority, it has four elements. We are going to work with the TUI SWIG, the working group that you're all excited to continue on updating our forest health thresholds this year. That's a priority that we heard from our partners and for us. and we want to continue to advance the forest restoration. We want to augment public communications through the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team. They have their own public information team. We just had our public information officer jump back in as the co-chair of that committee to really continue to advance the communications about what's happening on the landscape so people know and are prepared for wildfire. We want to take a look at best management practices for planning in the wildland urban interface. There is a lot going on in the West, in different local jurisdictions that have been affected by fire that are rethinking some of the ways that they are planning around in the WUI. We'd be remiss not to be looking at all of that. So we are going to start to do an assessment of that. And then be a convener in regional discussions on evacuation and emergency response. And I won't go too into detail because Dr. Kat McIntyre is following me later for a presentation, but we want to be really pointed about what our role is in evacuation. We are not evacuation planners or emergency responders. That's who leads evacuations, and they have done a lot of planning. We just held we convened a panel of emergency response personnel last month at our governing board that Kat is going to summarize for you. And that's part of this strategic priority. We can continue to play that role to make sure that discussion is happening at the regional level. The next one, lake and watershed restoration. That's where we've put 4 key elements. Investigating lake clarity. I talked about that theme we heard. We want to play a support role to the Science Council to dive deeper into that and see where we need to go. We want to prioritize the long-term aquatic invasive species strategy for the Tahoe Keys. Now that the control methods test is over, we need to take that information and put it to use. We want to enhance our aquatic invasive species prevention program. You've heard recent updates from Dennis. We just updated our decontamination policy to be extra vigilant against the golden mussel. We want to augment non-motorized. We're really going to put a focus on that this year. And another threshold update, we want to update our recreation thresholds this year that will help drive advancing our sustainable recreation solutions. So ambitious plan, 2 categories coming this year. Next one, transportation. The regional transportation plan will be adopted this year. We want to continue focusing on funding, implementing projects. We've got the biennial performance report coming this year, and a new technology plan. It's a really important part of making sure we bring transportation into the transformative state that we want to see. Big focus on local and regional transit support and analysis. I don't think that would be a surprise. It's continued work that we've been working on for the last few years. And lastly is housing. You're familiar with the Tahoe Living Working Group. That work plan will continue this year. This phase being called Cultivating Community and Conserving the Basin. That's really going to focus on modernizing our regional growth management and development rights systems, our permitting. This year, we anticipate draft recommendations coming out of the Tahoe Living Working Group and starting the environmental analysis on those proposed changes to the regional plan. So that's going to be an exciting chunk of work. My last slide is an attempt to say there's much more that will be going on beyond those priorities. And this list isn't even exhaustive, but I wanted to make sure you see there's a ton planned for this year outside of those strategic priorities that we do day to day here at TRPA. Will be the Barton EIS will be a big chunk of the workload this year. We have several environmental redevelopment project reviews in the hopper that will be coming to this commission, I'm sure. 4 area plan updates planned, permitting process improvements. We have a work plan for that. We're really going to continue to look at how do we integrate with AI and other options to continue to make the permitting process easier. Taking a look at our project impact assessment tool and our VMT policy. That was a theme we heard through the threshold evaluation to look at. There's a new boating app being launched to make sure we're continuing to communicate about no wake zones and how safety on the lake and how people are using the lake. The Protect grant, I think we've talked about here before, was a grant that we have almost acquired from the Federal Highway Administration that will look at how we can continue to make our transportation more resilient in the face of wildfire, floods, emergencies. So with the new federal administration, we're still working on getting that grant secured, but that's going to be a chunk of work that will really be about setting that scope and that money. I think that is it. Yes, thank you. Questions, thoughts on where we take I will say this, I gave this similar presentation to our board last month in May, and we'll be taking our work plan in a couple weeks at the end of June. So this item isn't for action, but if you have any feedback or thoughts on what we take back to the board in June, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. That's great. No vacations for TRPA staff this summer, I guess. There's a lot on there. Yeah, that's my comment. Looks good to me. Ashley, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I know that it's always hard to take these big things and kind of distill it down into action items. But kind of is similar vein to what Jason was bringing up related to sort of public perception, things like that. I think probably one of the major pieces that locals especially, but also the visitors think about is kind of this, basically how are we managing tourists? And, you know, the love to death piece. And from what I saw in your presentation, I understand that there was the part about the updating the recreation thresholds type thing, but that's not an actual sort of like, you know, kind of how we're going to deal with things. And from what I saw, I feel like most of that would be being addressed in the transportation section. But I will just say that I think, you know, if you're thinking about that, you kind of have to make that leap. There's not really sort of an explicit, you know, kind of action item related to that. Not that there needs to be, but I think that that's probably you know, something that's on the public's mind that maybe isn't well expressed as to, because we're doing lots of things for that. It's just maybe not as well expressed in that list as to kind of that being a priority. Because also those 4 things were the like the priorities, right? And so how is that priority expressed within those 4? And I could see that being perceived as not being in there.
Yeah, please, Kim. Thanks, Ashley.
This is Kim Carringer for the record. Thank you for the comment, Ashley. I agree. I think that it was a theme we heard in many different venues about visitor management, right? And it is kind of nested in a bunch of different parts, and maybe you don't see the action coming out of there. And I think I'd respond with the recreation thresholds are foundational to a lot of that for us to really be able to measure, like, where do we want to go and what do we need to do to get there? So I'm hopeful we'll see if we can get to some shared goals through that a lot of us already have, that we can put in, update ours to be consistent. That will drive an action plan of how we put projects in the queue through the EIP to achieve that threshold. So I agree. I don't want it to all be a paper exercise of like, let's set through thresholds. It really has to drive action. So there's that. And I think we've been talking with Devin Middlebrook and Dan Sieg and some others about this kind of recreation infrastructure action plan that really looks at our different recreation sites and evaluates like, what does this site need for it to better manage people? So that's the end game for that. And then as far as actual, you know, solutions on the ground, there's a ton happening. You'll see if you're driving around town this summer, and I won't go into detail on all of them, but new roundabouts, you know, new sidewalks, those are all EIP projects that really are, I think, helping address the issue. And maybe I can put that more in our presentation to the board of like the action projects that are occurring right now. Yes, thank you, John. Destination Stewardship Council as well. A lot of this, the visitor management and sustainable tourism messaging and actions like 4th of July management are all happening through that group that TRPA is a part of as well. So that's a good mention. Thank you.
And I think, I think I want to clarify that we are doing lots and lots of stuff. I think I just want to make sure that, you know, we as a group, but, you know, TRPA is you know, reflecting that in the, you know, priorities that you're showing the public. Cause I think it is a priority, but maybe not well reflected in that list. Yeah.
Thanks, Ashley. Other thoughts? APC members? Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Steve Bashira. So I want to repeat again this notion of trying to quantify the benefits, I presume the benefits of environmental redevelopment, because that was a big theme of the 2012 regional plan. And a lot of times we hear comments about things, people don't remember 2012 or they weren't around in 2012. And so, TRPA and its many partners have been marching down that road. And what is the benefit or what is the outcome of that? So I'm very sensitive to what you said about staff capacity, because whenever I take on something new, I turn and look at my staff and then I realize it's only me. So, but somehow if this fits in, because I know one of the things we talked about when I was sitting with the Black Dog group was, how to invite people in and get them to participate as an EIP participant, so it isn't something that public agencies are doing to people. It's something that people should be invited to participate in, and that hopefully will make them more willing and understand what their role is. I mean, I liken it to the situation we have with, forest health and wildfire prevention. It isn't just about what the people that respond to the sirens and the alarms do. It's about what you do at your home, and it's about what you do in your neighborhood. So somehow inviting people to be part of this, so it isn't just, us doing something to them, but them participating with us. So wherever that weaves into what you presented, I think would be of a benefit. I hope that makes sense.
Kim Carringer for the record. It absolutely makes sense. It is a priority this year that I didn't mention is the work that we have. You mentioned Black Dog. We have a contractor on board working with a bunch of the EIP agencies to better communicate what's going out and making and everything that you said. And so it is a priority this year to make sure that we find new ways to communicate about the EIP and get people involved. And I think there'll probably be a presentation coming to you about that. I'm not sure what time, but I can give you an update on that as we make progress on that. Yeah.
It's a good thing to add to your list. Yeah, this will keep growing. Mr. Young, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great discussion again. I really appreciate Steve's comments. Going towards public engagement has always been a difficult thing for us here. And I think that the EIP and the threshold evaluation both present a little bit of a danger and an enormous opportunity for that engagement. The danger is simply that as you communicate these things, it's really easy to give the public a sense that you've got it covered. Oh, I'm glad somebody's doing this, and we quickly become what I call the they. They're taking care of it. They're doing this. They are doing this, and it's separate from the public. And you can give a sense, wow, look at all the stuff we're doing. We've got it covered. But you can also use it as an opportunity for engagement by saying, here's what we're doing. Here's the work program. Here's the priorities that we have. Here's how it ties to our overall mission, what we're trying to accomplish. And oh, by the way, here's what you can do. And I think that's the thing that's really missing, and that in the future would be the great step forward for me, would be when we are publicly communicating our progress and our efforts on an EIP program and on the thresholds, we include, and oh, by the way, here's what you can do. Even if it's just don't throw your darn trash down, whatever it is, take the bus, learn about the bus, learn about this, learn every one of those EIPs and every one of those thresholds. We could find a way to tell a resident, an employee, a visitor, somebody in the Basin community, we could find a way to tell them, here's how you can contribute to the effort. And so we don't become just the they. We are including them in the progress that we all have to make. So the second thing I would say, thank you for listening, is that one of the roles TRPA can have in all of this is providing really quality information, especially with the wildfire preparation. I think one of the things we've all noticed is that as fear in a community rises, so does misinformation, and then it's a feedback loop. And just providing quality links and quality places for people to go get real information would be really helpful, I believe, because especially with wildfire, but with a lot of things, as misinformation rises, so does fear. As fear rises, so does misinformation. And one of the rules that we could have here is just to make sure people have access to real quality information regarding these things. So thanks for listening. That's all I've got right now.
Thank you, Eric. Other thoughts? Okay, I think we're good. Let me go to public comment on this item. So this is an opportunity to comment on, what are we calling this one? 5A2 of our agenda. We'll go to members in the room first, and then we'll go to members of the public online, just as a
May I
reminder.
interrupt? Sorry.
Yes, thank
It
you.
was informational, so we don't need to take public comment on this. There'll be the public interest comment. You could if you want to, but yeah, because it was informational. We usually, I believe, we don't do public comment on the informational items. Like
Okay,
a separate comment.
sounds good. We can, my computer died, so I can't see if there's any hands raised. There is one. Let's just take the one. And then if anyone missed the opportunity, we could take it at the end. But why don't we, Catherine, I'll go to you for the unmuting of the one hand we have.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, she's put it down, but we'll see. Elise Fett, if you'd like to comment, please unmute.
Good morning. Just a couple of things. Under clarity, it said that you were going to use the controlled method test. I look forward to hearing more about that, and then also would like to point out the source of the clarity issues, nutrients, and the importance that we still, I believe people are still not aware of the need to reduce or eliminate use of fertilizers. We're trying to get the word out. Transportation, I know you guys have, I know it's been in printing, but somehow people are still bringing a lot of fertilizers into the basin, especially in the Keys, where it's obviously feeding the aquatic weeds. And we're getting more algae in the lake. And yes, it's warming, the lake is warming, but algae comes with nutrients. And again, we have so many people that are putting fertilizers on, not even realizing what they're doing. Transportation, please address the issue with the mixed use paths. Note the importance of separating bike paths, because e-bikes are now very accessible and useful for commuting and sightseeing. They get people off of our roads, but it is really, really not safe, obviously, to have runners, walkers with dogs and children. They need to be on separate paths. That's so important. The other issue with this is to resolve the concerns of the parking in the neighborhoods, as what's happened, of course, here in the east side of Incline with the Sand Harbor Bike Trail. It's not, people who are walking are yelling at bikers. And so the bike paths need to come through and not have the neighborhoods concerned that there's going to be parking issues. And obviously, there's more parking issues when you have walkers. So there's a double reason why we really need to have separate commuter or sightseeing bike paths. It's too dangerous to mix. Housing, the ADUs you mentioned, the permitting process that you're going to be doing improvements. I look forward to seeing that. I have people that are in Placer County that they give up on getting their ADU. Asking for a full building right, development right for an ADU, I think that needs to be considered. I don't understand. You could say 2 different ADUs could be done under one, or 3 different ADUs could do under one development right. But we shouldn't be requesting, I don't think it makes sense to have a full development right. We really need to encourage these ADUs. It's a win-win-win for the owners of the property to have the extra income, and for us to have affordable housing quickly without waiting for developers to get funding. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Elise. I know the development right issue is being looked at as part of the cultivating community working group process. So more to come on that, I think. But those are good comments. Catherine, any other hands raised?
No, Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised.
Great, thank you. I'll go ahead and close public comment. Say thank you again to Kim and Dan. Don't take a vacation this summer, Dan. You
Thank
got
you
work
all.
to do.
Mhm.
Have a good rest of the day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And sorry, Hester, real quick. I will just close with the community. I heard the priority of communications, and as Julie pointed out on the Tahoe in-depth, you'll see the cover story is on the threshold evaluation. So that went out to all the basin homeowners. It's a good read if you want to remind yourself all the key takeaways from the threshold evaluation. And thank you for the time today.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it's John Hester. As we get change teams here for the next item, I just wanted to point out to you all that I think it was 2 meetings ago that at the end of the meeting, you asked for an update on or a response to what we are doing on evacuation and wildfire. And so we had, in line with one of our strategic priorities that Kim just talked about, we had a session at the last governing board, and we've asked Kat McIntyre to come and give you an update on that in response to, I think it was you, Garth, who asked for that, and the chairman. So that kind of cue up Kat and give her time to get seated and take it away.
That's perfect.
Great.
Welcome,
Thanks.
Dr. McIntyre. It's great to have you here. So just for the public, this is agenda item 5B. This is a presentation on the Tahoe Basin Forest Health and Wildfire Preparedness Priorities. Information on this item is on 257, page 257 of your packet. And hi, Kat.
Hi, Mr. Chair. How are you? Thank you so much, members and Chairman Ferry. As mentioned, my name is Kat McIntyre. I lead up the Environmental Improvement Program Department for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. And within that, I carry the Forest Health Program. So I will be giving you an update on what are the priorities specific to TRPA for this year and most likely into the next coming years related to forest health and wildfire. Next slide, please. So this timeline really exemplifies the long history of leadership in the wildfire and forest health space, not only for basin partners, but for the TRPA. Since the gondola fire in 2002, wildfire and forest health have been a priority for the agency and for the governing board. We provided seed funding to help develop the first Lake Tahoe Basin Community Wildfire Protection Plan. In 2007, the Angora fire burned 254 structures and 31,000 acres. And post Angora, the Blue Ribbon Commission was convened, and our previous board member, Bud Hicks, sat on that commission and led the charge to cut the green tape at TRPA, making sure we facilitated forest health projects with our partners while protecting the environment. TRPA has done a comprehensive review of forest health regulations and implemented MOUs with all of our major land managers and implementers to increase the pace and scale of restoration in this space. Additionally, TRPA is a founding member of the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team and the Fire Pit, or the Public Information Team, which is the communication arm of the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team. And we act as a collaborator and convener and have been since day one on that working group. Fast forward to the last 5 years, and TRPA has continued to make progress in the forest health and wildfire space. We updated our code for steep slopes to allow mechanical equipment on slopes between 30 to 50%, allowing implementers to reduce fuels in some of the most critically important areas while again maintaining environmental protections. We saw this last month with the Incline Smart Community Pilot, where we had equipment on slopes around 45%. We've worked with law enforcement and emergency management and fire service to finalize the regional evacuation plan. And we continue to convene and collaborate with partners to increase the pace and scale of restoration work, test out new innovative technologies, and protect communities. Next slide, please. So what you see on the screen is essentially a diagram that outlines what is considered the national cohesive strategy. And so this is a really useful kind of tool when you're thinking about what do you want to do as an agency to make sure that you're doing a comprehensive and holistic approach to forest health and wildfire. And so you'll see this is a three-pronged approach that includes building resilient landscapes, building fire adapted communities, and then developing safe and effective wildfire response. And this really guides the work at Tahoe Fire and Fuels team and guides the work at TRPA. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to use that kind of as the heuristic with which we look through to kind of analyze and understand what TRPA's priorities are for the coming year. So the first one around fire adapted communities, there's two key pieces. The first is to review and develop an assessment of the best, we're calling them best management practices. They're really best practices in general for development and building in wildfire prone areas. We know that this isn't just a Tahoe Basin issue or a California issue. This is a West-wide issue. And so we really want to do a comprehensive review across the West of what's happening and what can we bring into the basin if we need to move the needle. Additionally, we want to continue to support and replicate projects like the Incline Fire Smart Community Pilot. So for those that don't know, that happened about a month ago, and it's a really cool project. It's a systematic science-based approach to identifying which risk reduction mitigations matter the most. So you use modeling and technology, and then partners are able to identify how we're reducing risk, what actions reduce risk the most, what are the most impactful, all with the end goal of engaging the insurance industry in reinsuring a lot of the properties. We've already had requests from other neighborhoods in Incline Village as well as Glenbrook and interest down in the South Shore as well. So the idea is really to take this model, learn from it, tweak it, because we know, right, that communities are different around the lake. What works in Incline won't always work in South Lake Tahoe. But it's really about focusing on those communities and those neighborhoods and reducing risk in smart, strategic ways. Next slide, please. In terms of resilient landscapes, you heard a little bit about this from Kim earlier. We want to update our forest health thresholds. So our current thresholds for forest health are antiquated, and they do not measure or assess the progress and work that's being done by our implementers in a meaningful way. We want to continue to collaborate and convene the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, the MAC, which is the leadership team for the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, and the Fire Pit, which is that communications arm. We want to spend concerted effort elevating and amplifying communications. We just heard about that in the previous presentations. This for forest health and wildfire really looks at, when we're talking about forest health and wildfire, this really looks like a focus on Fire Pit. We already have TRPA leadership in terms of a co-lead for that group, but really spending time and funding to develop more systematic communication strategy to get the word out on all of the great work in that, using the national cohesive framework kind of structure to make sure we're hitting all of the key areas. And then lastly, it's to continue to support and advocate for funding. We already are doing this, but we need to make sure that we keep our eye on the prize. Things like priorities for thinning around evacuation corridors and critical infrastructure for in terms of water infrastructure for fire suppression that we know was so crucial to the LA firefight. Next slide, please. And then we've heard a lot at the governing board, at APC, in the public, that there's a lot of interest around safe and effective wildfire response, specifically when it comes to emergency response and evacuation. So what is TRPA's role in there? We kind of see three key areas. One is building resilience in transportation infrastructure. So this is that Protect grant that Kim was talking about that we are waiting to execute with Federal Highways Administration. The next is acting as a regional convener with our evacuation partners to develop lessons learned and facilitate communication wherever needed or possible. And then lastly, looking at technology and innovation, the SMART grant, this gave real-time data and the testing ability to understand how we collect data and the different technologies that we can use to collect data to better understand our transportation needs and traffic. And then Xyloplan, which is a fire pathways modeling software that we can utilize to understand on our evacuation corridors, maybe what are those pinch points, and then target funding and resources to those areas to do treatments and ensure safety. So next slide. No, you're good. So you heard from John Hester that we had a panel at the governing board, I think was that 2 weeks ago, on May 28th. And next slide, please. And this is really kind of our first entry into that regional convener space when we talk about wildfire response. We had Sheriff Coverly from Douglas County, Kelly Echevarria from Washoe County Emergency Management, Chief Drennan from City of South Lake Tahoe Fire and Rescue, Troy Morton from El Dorado County Sheriff and Emergency Services, and Dan O'Keefe from Cal OES. And I have the full link to that presentation. I'm going to give you the highlights and summarize some of the themes, but I can also make sure that the link, I'll send it to Tracy. I actually think she has it, and we can make sure that everyone has it for your listening pleasure. Next slide, please. It is really good. So one of the big themes that we heard from this panel was around communication, coordination, and collaboration. So I kind of broke this into two big buckets. One is the 3 C's as they relate to community and the public. So there's a lot of activity occurring in terms of community preparedness, outreach, and education. Partners are working to target outreach to vulnerable populations. They recognize we have vulnerable populations in our communities, and they have tailored their outreach efforts to those populations. And then the Lake Tahoe Regional Evacuation Plan that was completed last year. This is really a high-level document, but it's got a lot of great information in terms of who the partners are, how they're going to run things. It is not going to map out road by road which way you should go during an evacuation, but it does give you the basic resources to understand what you need for an evacuation and where you should, where you're going to get more information during an evacuation. The second bucket is around partners. So the panelists all stressed there is continuous communication between neighboring jurisdictions, that they are always talking, they are always planning together, that they're doing regional trainings where all law and law enforcement and fire are coming together to do scenario planning. And when we say scenario planning, this isn't just different types of wildfire or where's the wildfire coming from. It's also shifting scenarios that have either greater visitation numbers for that day with a fire coming from here. So they're really looking at all different scenarios when they're considering how we're going to move people out of the basin. And then they are also setting up kind of these smaller working groups. So the Tahoe Emergency Managers Group, that group meets once a month. They share plans, they do trainings together. So there is a ton of communication and coordination occurring between all of the jurisdictions all of the time. Next slide, please. Another big theme that we heard is around technology and innovation. So these partners are using innovative technology to coordinate amongst themselves, coordinate on incidents, but then also get information out to the public. One is Perimeter. So this is a software that increases communication with the public. It shows you the evacuation zones, your evacuation routes. It has information like where is the closest shelter? Where do you take your pets or large animals in an evacuation? Another one is IPAWS. So they wanted to let everyone know IPAWS stands for Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. IPAWS allows emergency responders and emergency management it's like an Amber Alert where you get pinged if there's an incident and they need you to leave immediately. RAVE is another interesting one. This one allows for access and functional needs communication. So you have to sign up for RAVE. It's like code red, but once signed up, you can notify, you essentially tick a box that says, I have functional needs, and they then can communicate with you in different ways. So it's not just your standard way of communication. The Watch Duty app is one that you hear about often. This app is great. It has so much information about every prescribed burn and wildfire in the area. I believe it's across 5 or 6 states. And it's real-time information. It's a really great resource. And then the alert cameras. I think we all forget because we've had them for the past, they've been we're getting more, but like we've had them for the past 10 years. This is something that it's not a technology that is all across the country. This is very unique to California in this area. Those cameras are being utilized. So they're training AI to actually scan those cameras constantly to then identify smokes and then notify dispatch and resources. And they're finding that that the AI is relatively decently accurate, and that it's actually able to identify fire like an hour before any human person would be able to identify it. So that's another great technology that's kind of coming into play in this space. Next slide, please. We also asked the panel about lessons learned from previous wildfires, and these were just a few. They obviously have many. One, the importance of cross-border collaboration coordination. This is specific, right, from the Caldor fire. They recognized that there needed to be more communication earlier. Traffic control and syncing of lights. During during the Caldor, 60 additional law enforcement officers were brought in from outside the region who don't understand the traffic patterns, don't understand how things work in the city, and they're operating those lights all independently of each other. So the idea that we really need to get everyone on the same page and synced up so that when traffic does need to move, it's moving quickly and efficiently. Preparedness, that this isn't just about first responders being able to knock on your door, that you need to be ready to go and advocating for yourself, that the public has a key role to play when we're talking about evacuations and being prepared for wildfire. And then time. And I took this quote specifically from Sheriff Coverly. Time can be your greatest ally or your worst enemy. The pre-planning and the preparation ahead of time helps you with time on the positive side. All of the defensible space, the home hardening, that gives evacuation and us time. And so really the idea that they are always trying to figure out the calculus when it comes to how much time do we have and how do we get people out safely. But part of that is the individual's responsibility in terms of home hardening and defensible space to buy more time to get out safely. Next slide, please. We also discussed redevelopment, development, and wildfire. We heard new or redeveloped buildings and sites are really constructed to withstand fire. They are hardened, meeting new codes with defensible space, sprinklers, non-combustible roofing and siding, and often double to triple pane windows. A quote from Chief Drennan: anytime you have redevelopment where you're improving upon, not building out like a subdivision, but improving upon the existing, then that's a benefit. He spent significant time talking about how redevelopment actually from a wildfire perspective is a benefit and gives them time. And that in many instances, they would have people potentially shelter in place in a new development because it is built to withstand wildfire. Next slide, please. Lastly, we discussed what roles can TRPA play, right? Trying to really understand where we can plug in. Convening those regional evacuation partners for discussions as needed. We heard that, and that's really what we've kicked off. Communication coordination when needed. And then lastly, one that I think is a really easy and clean fit is around permitting and planning for radio systems or communication systems to support emergency response, right? There's infrastructure that our emergency responders need, and they still come to get permits. And so how can we at TRPA ensure that that is a streamlined, efficient process so that they get the equipment on the ground that they need and can be able and available to respond to emergencies. So with that, I will open it up for questions and discussions. And I want to just emphasize, there's so much great information in that panel discussion. So I will definitely get that link out so that everyone can listen.
Thanks a lot, Kat. Yeah, that was a great presentation. TRPA is taking this issue very seriously, and the partnership is as well. That's great to see. TRPA also did some pretty cool social media around that event that I saw with the Schwartz's onboarding to your team. So that was really cool to see. So encourage folks to watch that. And I saw a hand up go over here, but we'll go to APC member comments or questions for Kat now. So Ashley.
This is more of just a comment and additional information. You talked about the TRPA code amendment to increase the slopes up to 50%. And as you said, there's been some implementation of that. The Forest Service currently has our Lake Tahoe West restoration EA out for public comment. This is the draft EA. This will most likely be the last public comment period for that project because we are looking to use the emergency authorities available now for that decision. So there's some of the stuff with the NEPA process, like the objection periods that get waived in those instances. So we will hopefully have a decision on the Lake Tahoe West restoration project. Hopefully this early fall here is what we're anticipating, assuming things don't change, which they have been. But that's our goal. And I think I mentioned previously that we also had the scoping period for the Caldor Restoration Project EA, which also includes and slopes up to 50%. Both those projects are large landscape restoration projects, including thinning and prescribed fire and other restoration actions as well. And that one probably will have a decision out for that one, maybe January-ish next year. So just wanted to give the group a couple of updates on projects that are in, go along with the theme here of community protection. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Other comments? Hitch.
Kat, thanks for the presentation. I think I brought this up when we talked about the threshold evaluation, but in terms of design standards and hardening homes, generally the materials they have to use tend to be more modern, tend not to be natural appearing. And in order to get to where we need to go in terms of hardening homes, I think the TRPA goals and policies and the design standards are probably going to have to be reflect those changes in order to get us there. And it's just a comment. So.
Yep, it's a good comment, Hitch. Crystal.
Thank you, Crystal Jacobson, for the record. Great presentation. Thank you. Yeah, we definitely wanted to hear this, so I appreciate you coming and joining us. I actually, just to tag on to what John said, I'm just curious about, BMPs and preparedness and the home hardening and whether or not you're looking at the TRPA, codes, design standards, and how they align with really the goals of the state of California anyway, in terms of home hardening, that kind of thing. And then another question is about the Tahoe Regional Evacuation Plan, and if you were looking at other sort of local jurisdiction plans when that was prepared. And then also, we hear a lot about this desire for evac modeling and whether or not that has come up in these discussions and is there a plan for that? And then, last question is about same sort of thing around preparedness is there conversation going on with the resort communities about evacuation for guests? I realize that the public does have sort of a responsibility, right, to kind of sign up for the apps and that sort of thing. But for short-term rental, property managers and guests, is there conversations about how to improve their communications with guests to make sure that we get notification out to folks that come in that might not be signed up already for those notifications?
Great. So I'll start with the TRPA code one. I've got the 4 written down. We'll start there and we'll see where this goes. Okay. So yes, I think that is the intention of this review. So the idea would be we start with a kind of a systematic assessment of what the best practices are that are out there. And really, in my mind, the way that looks is you could then kind of code those best practices by different areas. You could clump them into buckets, right? Like this has to do with home hardening. This is defensible space. This is site assessment and where you end up putting it. This is vegetation. So you could clump those up, and then I think it is a review of those versus what is in our code and then what is also in area plans to understand, are there opportunities for improvement or are there potentially conflicts like what Member Hitchcock said. So I think that's where I see it going. in the future. John, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to.
Sure. A lot of home hardening is in and we anticipate will come from revised. In fact, Devin and I talked to one of the California Assembly members. There's going to be new building code, revisions to the building codes coming out. A lot of that's going to be where the home hardening update comes from. Then we, like Kat said, we're looking at the things we do and like John said, that impact that. The other interesting point, I guess, is we've already started looking around. For example, we've looked at some FEMA training on what happened in Boulder, Colorado. I don't know if you all remember that grass fire came across the prairie and burned into Boulder. Some of the things that are typically done, like in subdivision design, we obviously can't do because we're not doing any new subdivisions. But we've actually talked about ideas, Kat and others. Could we, as mitigation measures, go retrofit a subdivision with a secondary access that didn't have one? So there's a lot of, I think, sort of creative retrofit ideas that we might be able to apply even though we're not doing subdivision. So that's the kind of stuff with that, in answer to your first question, that we're looking at.
Thank you, John. And then in terms of the evacuation plan, so interestingly enough, the idea that we have a regional evacuation plan where each district and area kind of was sewn together and blended together is a really innovative and novel approach. There aren't very many areas, I think we might be one of the only, that have a regional evacuation plan where you actually have a one-stop shop to find all the information. So that in and of itself has been really innovative. I believe that they have updated them. Each jurisdiction really brought their own to the table. So I believe they've looked at what are best management practices and how other areas are doing it. We could get you more information on exactly like what that looked like. So that's evacuation planning, evacuation modeling. That has definitely come up quite a bit. Washoe County has funding and is going to be moving on that actually and doing evacuation analysis. I know there's interest from Douglas County. I believe El Dorado County is also interested. There's just a funding component that is associated with that. And so we're kind of, I would say from a TRPA perspective, that we have felt it's really the local jurisdictions that should be carrying that forward. But I think that that always can evolve as the situation evolves. I would also maybe ask John if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a little bit answering both your questions there, I think, is both Kim and Kat have mentioned the PROTECT grant, and I can't tell you what PROTEC stands for, ECT stands for, but there is a word, a real title. And we've been notified by our senators that we have received that grant, but given the same things Ashley was talking about, we're not sure when and how we're going to get it. But anyway, in that it talks about doing what's called a resiliency infrastructure program. Did I get that right, Kat?
Resilience Improvement Plan.
Yeah, it's RIP, which I don't want, rest in peace, but yeah, so I'm not using it. But anyway, it's all about looking at your infrastructure, particularly your transportation infrastructure, from a resiliency standpoint, not just fire, but flood or snow emergencies or whatever. And so we anticipate, we've actually started doing some of the work, like we have one of our GIS people actually took flood, we took some climate models and did what could be the extent of floods in the future, which is bigger than it has been in the past, and what infrastructure would be at risk. Same thing with wildfire. We would look at it from that perspective and use that to help identify where we might need to replace infrastructure. Clearly, the Tahoe Fires and Fire and Fuels team folks have asked, identify evacuation routes and make sure you've thinned around them. So those are the kind of things it's not, we don't do evacuation planning, and the emergency responders made it clear that they're not going to look to us to do that. That's their purview. But they did say there's a lot of complementary things you can do. So I don't know if that was.
And then lastly, I believe you asked a question about resorts and visitors and evacuation and how we're getting information out to them. That is in terms of the resorts, and this is speculation, so I would need to get you a more accurate answer from law enforcement. I would assume a resort is operating similar to the hospital. So the hospital has to have an evacuation plan, and they work with law enforcement and the fire districts to kind of form that and know what's going to happen and when it's going to go. And I believe the resorts would have the same responsibility, that they would be on the resort to have an evacuation plan in place and then integrate it. John, yes.
I wanted to add one thing that they pointed out that hospitals and the hotels are actually sometimes shelter in place and where they set up the emergency operations center. So some of them might not be evacuated. They may in fact be places where people go. So I think Kat's right that they work with the local law enforcement on how they would want to evacuate. In terms of short-term rentals, that's a good one that I don't think either of us could answer today, but as you know, we certify short-term rental programs. So as we do this comprehensive look at our code that Kat talked about, maybe that's something we could look at.
Yeah, so for Placer, we developed a QR code that's on like a guest flyer that has to be posted in the units where they can go to sign up, but it's at, I mean, we're informing them, but it's tough, right? To make sure that guests are, signing up for notifications. So just curious about that.
Yeah, we use a similar approach at El Dorado. You have to post, we require posting near the front door on how to access that information and make sure you're signed up, but whether the guests do it or not is up to them. So thanks, Crystal. Other thoughts, Robert?
Robert Ehrlich, thanks for the presentation. You mentioned again for resort areas, there might be shelter in place for guests, but look a little bit, and I think you talked a little bit about if people have no cars or disabilities. Was one of the apps you mentioned something they would be contacting?
Yes, so Rave is one of those services, and Rave is it's like Code Red or Code Red. You have to sign up for it. Okay. So that is one of the limiting factors is you have to seek out and sign up for it.
Okay, well, yeah, some discussion of either encouraging that or also on guests who may come here without cars and may not be at the big resorts, but maybe nearby. How do we envision they would evacuate if need be?
Jason? Oh, were you gonna jump in, John? Or
I was just gonna say you, both Ashley and you mentioned, Ashley mentioned destination stewardship or how we manage the visitors. And Kim mentioned the intelligent transportation system work that the Transportation Strategic Initiative is going to do. One of the things we're trying to look at is in real time knowing every facility that has parking and where transit systems are, where the traffic jams are. And that same ITS or intelligent transportation system data can be used not just during peak visitation times, but during emergency events. So we're also trying to figure out how we can use that in a complementary way when we have disasters as well as for destination management. So that's something we'll be looking at. We all dream of the day we could get on our phone before we even come into the basin and say, oh, I don't want to go to Sand Harbor, it's full, I'll go over to whatever, go to Emerald Bay instead. I doubt if both of those would be, but those aren't good examples. But maybe we go to Commons, or you know what? Everything's full at the lake and there's traffic jams. Maybe I'll decide to go next weekend. Yeah, whatever. I mean, but the point is, and then if I am going to go, this is the parking lot where I can reserve a space, and so there's, and reserve a entrance into the park or whatever. So that's kind of the vision, and how that works with destination management and emergency management would be great if we could get to do that, all that.
Can I just want to supplement really quickly. What you're talking about is a piece of the Protect grant that John was discussing around that like is in our scope of work. And so it's around fleet management and developing a communication plan / a coordination plan for all fleet managers in the basin, getting them together to understand who has what assets and resources, where maybe populations are that we would need to be targeting, and who can be available and ready during an incident to utilize their fleet to bring people out of the basin.
Thanks you both. Case?
Thanks for the presentation. You brought up shelter in place. It's an interesting topic. I'm working on a very large redevelopment project on behalf of the town of Mammoth Lakes, and shelter in place and secondary access has been a big part of the discussions on that project. And what we're hearing from the state and from the fire district is shelter in place is not an option. Like that's not one of the selections you can make. It may be a practical outcome of certain developments that happen, but it's been really interesting because I think that there's an inherent thought that, you know, shelter in place that's one of the options you can have as a part of your emergency response plan. But that is in fact not in the fire code currently, as you probably know. So you'll hear that brought up. But I think it is important for people to really understand the role that shelter in place plays in areas where wildfire is a reality, because I think there's a misunderstanding of what role that plays in how you respond. The second thing is that you know, I think the emphasis that's been placed on fire and fuels management has been really good to see. And those of you that have been on the APC for a long time have heard me speak about this before. It has been really an important shift in the basin, and there's been a lot of good work that's happened. But I do have concerns when I hear whether it's comments from the public or discussions that happen at the agency level about what are the parameters that we put on it, and is it at any and all costs that we will do any fire and fuels management? Because remember during the Caldor fire, I had a pretty lengthy thought after that fire, because there were things that happened in response that I thought were over the top. And sometimes I think we forget that we live in the mountains. We've chosen to live in a place where wildfire is a part of where we are. And we have to balance those things. We absolutely have been, you know, behind the times and what needed to happen for decades. And there is a lot of aggressive work that needs to occur. But I think we also at times need to make sure that we're asking ourselves is at what cost. You know, the Caldor fire burned within a couple 100 feet of my house. And when I left, I knew there was a chance that it wouldn't be there, because I also realized that I chose to live in the mountains, and that's one of the risks. Just like if you live on the coast and there's a risk of a you know, hurricane or a tidal wave. And so I think we always need to make sure that we're asking ourselves those questions, because we need to be careful that we don't find ourselves, you know, whoever's sitting in this seat 30 or 40 or 50 years from now says, I wish we would have thought about that a little more before we executed. Because now we're seeing the unintended consequences of the things that we did. And in general, I'm very supportive of the fire and fuels work that's happening. I think the planning that you guys are doing and the projects that are being executed are absolutely needed. But I always think that it's important that we remember that, especially I think about the emergency evacuation. We get often told how we're not handling that. So I really appreciate the things that you have put together. But I also try to remind people when they ask me about it in my role as an APC member that we live in a physically constrained place. You've chosen to live in the mountains in a basin. There are inherent risks that no infrastructure we can build is ever going to address. And I think that's an important point that we need to make sure that it's at all within reason what's absolutely reasonable and practical that we can do. Because I don't think some of the things that we hear, some of the feedback that we get as APC members, and I'm sure the fire committee gets consistently, are just beyond what's practical to be done. So I want to reemphasize that, because I think it's a really important point that doesn't come up enough.
Yep, it's a good comment. Garth?
Thank you, Kat, for the presentation. I really appreciate it. Two things. I really enjoyed hearing from you, John, that that the TRPA is considering the whole issue of secondary access. I know there's a number of homeowners that I've talked to here locally that have had their homeowners insurance canceled just because they don't have secondary access into their neighborhood. And so, I mean, having the different agencies work together, I mean, a lot of the land around these neighborhoods is Forest Service, being open to maybe providing some level of secondary access. Maybe it doesn't have to be a paved road exactly. In any case, it's really nice to hear that TRPA is open to that, because I think that's very, very important. And I think that falls within something that's reasonable that can be done. The other small concern that I have is the level of tree overcrowding in the neighborhoods. So much work has been done immediately adjacent to the neighborhoods in the WUI that can really slow the fire down. But you get into these neighborhoods, and I mean, for my neighborhood, for example, all the work's been done on the outside, and you have homeowners that meet the criteria for you know, no vegetation 5 feet within their house, but yet their backyard is overstocked and it's just ready to burn. And so I don't know, are there any sort of programs that are available, or outreach or grant monies or something that's potentially available for private homeowners to assist them with removal of some of their overstocked vegetation on their property, even though they meet the defensible space requirements? Because I see all the work on the outside, but the core, where all the people's houses are, there's a big problem there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that defensible space inspections should be looking beyond just the 5-foot zone. And in a lot of instances they are. So that's one thing that we can be pushing and ensuring at the Tahoe Fire and Fuel team, is that when we're talking about defensible space inspections, we're talking about a comprehensive look at the parcel. Because you're 100% right? Like, just because you're clean 5 feet up to the house does not mean that the 100 baby trees aren't going to torch and then wind picks it up and takes it into your house. The second piece around grant programs, that has been a really difficult nut to crack, is what I would say. There are some FEMA programs that do fund things like that. They're just, it's a real challenge for any of the agencies to apply to get that money. And then you have to set up a rebate program. It is almost like an entire, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't happen, is what I'll say. It just means that it is a big fish to fry. It's something that we're looking at. We've recently got more capacity at the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team with a dedicated program coordinator who is, her full-time focus is just focusing on TFFT and what needs to be happening and helping with the partners and going after things like that. So that is something that's on our minds. And it's something that she has indicated she's really interested in as well. It'll take setting up the infrastructure to do something like that. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't happen. It just means it's going to take a little bit of time for us to figure out what the best way to do that is.
That's great. Thank you for that. And one other question, you mentioned the pilot program up there in Incline, and basically after implementing some of these projects, trying to get insurance companies to reinsure. How are you going about that and communicating with them? Because I get the impression that a lot of insurance companies don't really have all the information available, that all the work that has been done, you know, especially like if you back up to the Forest Service land, they may not know about, you know, a thinning project that was done immediately adjacent to the area. It's just like they just take a whole side of the street and say no, or by zip code. So what sort of communication level have you had with the different insurance companies in effort to sort of expand their mind?
That's a great question. So the insurance company that we have at the table is Rock Rose Insurance. And this is really more of a boutique reinsurer company. This is it's an individual who started Rock Rose, had worked for the insurance companies. So he has like a very deep, intimate knowledge of how the insurance companies work. And then he, created this one. And the idea is really that we use the modeling and the data and all of the GIS that we have, they will now have as well. So they will have all of the modeling that we will be doing in terms of like real-time data. And so they'll be able to he's interested in the idea of being able to make more of like a parcel by parcel site specific assessment versus what you're talking about, which is the large swath. And it's a pilot, right? This might crash and burn. Hopefully it doesn't. Yeah, it won't burn. It'll just crash. There'll still be lessons learned from it, right? That we can then use. But so we have been having conversations with them, and they're at the table and they're really intrigued and excited about the opportunity that this might bring.
That's great. And I think, you know, with increased communication, enhancing all that, like exposing what you're doing there to everyone else, I think would maybe help drive everything. So just keep on trucking. Thank you.
Grateful Dead. Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley Cyber. And going off what Garth said, not necessarily grant program type stuff, but I think messaging is really important related to defensible space and tree removal. I'm going to be totally honest that I, you know, am somewhat ignorant as to what folks can actually do, but I know that, you know, up in Incline in the neighborhood up there, the general consensus or feeling is that you can't take out trees. Like unless they're a hazard, TRPA won't let you take out trees. And so, and that's obviously not true. So what being better about getting out that message about what actually are you allowed to do on your property and what is encouraged. And then maybe also thinking about, you know, what are the impediments that people have in doing those steps, and you know, is TRPA, you know, being helpful in those steps. Thank you.
I think that's a good point. Yep. Yep. All our partners need to educate. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve DeShera for the record. So on the issue of insurance companies, there are, I'm thinking about the nonprofit that Chris Anthony works for. So there are nonprofit organizations that have significant influence that are trying to make the insurance companies understand that there's a fire here. You just don't blanket wipe out everybody's insurance coverage. You have to be more strategic, like you said, parcel by parcel or neighborhood by neighborhood, because what the insurance companies were doing, if there's a fire, they take out the whole area, and that's just wrong. And so it's not always up to TRPA to solve all these things, but I think there are organizations like that that are working with the insurance company to try to get them to be a little bit more focused. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And that Chris is involved with the Incline pilot. So he is the one who brought Rock Rose to the table. He is consulting for the Moore Foundation is who you're referencing. And it was also the Tahoe Fund. So Tahoe Fund and Chris through the Moore Foundation have been able to engage Rock Rose and bring them to the table.
That's great. Final thoughts? I don't see any hands raised online. Okay, I'm gonna take Graham's advice. We'll do public comment on this item as part of item 7, public interest comments for members of the public. That's your key there. And we can say thank you to Kat for joining us today. Really appreciate that. Keep up the great work. We know you will. And I'm gonna move us. It's 12:16. I need to be gone by 12:40 latest. I bet others have 1 o'clock meetings and lunch ahead of them. So let's cruise and do our report. So I'm gonna go to Mr. Hester for the executive
I
director
will
report.
try to speak at 1.5 times speed. No items from the last APC were required governing board action, so don't have to report on that. Upcoming summit in August, be sponsored by Senator Schiff. So make sure you put that on your tentative calendars. Tahoe Living Working Group, which you're the chair of, Mr. Chair, will be meeting next, I think, 2 weeks.
23rd and 24th.
Yeah. And then we will have a Tahoe Living Working Group item here. Washoe County's Tahoe area plan, we have some amendments we expect. Regional transportation plan will be coming back to you. I will also make sure you get a copy of the work plan we're taking to the governing board in a couple weeks, just FYI. If you'd like a presentation on it, I can do that, but I think mainly just make sure you have it. And with that, I will cede my time to the general counsel.
Any questions for John? Brian?
Do we have a location for the federal summit?
Yes, Valhalla.
Okay, thanks.
It's early August, Valhalla, yeah. August 6th, thank you. Fantastic. Okay, thanks, John. Graham, General Counsel report.
Really not much to report. We're seeing a little uptick in some enforcement activity recently. And you know, we're pursuing those and then just there's several different permitting type decisions that have kind of been, you know, in the hopper for a while. And so some of those are more difficult matters and those are kind of getting unstuck. So it's you know, a little bit of an interesting time for the governing board. Some of those are going to be appealed. And so there's just a little bit more tricky permitting decisions, like I said, that we're just getting unstuck and close calls. So there's appeals happening and kind of a busy time for the legal office. But other than that, just not much more to report.
Good. Yeah, busy's good. Makes the day go by. Just check the right amount of busyness is perfect. Thanks, Graham. All right, it's our turn for comments. I'll just go down the table. So Crystal.
Yeah, thank you. I've got just one. Placer County's hosting next Tuesday night, the 17th, an open house town hall on emergency preparedness and evacuation planning. So I just wanted to kind of shout out on that. That's 6 p.m. at the North Tahoe Event Center in Kings Beach.
I saw the press on that. That's great. Thank you. Ashley?
Yeah, I gave an update to the group on the couple of planning projects that we have out right now. If folks are attempting to look at our websites for information, the best I can say is if it's working at that time, it's working at that time. There was some things that got doged and then undoged, and so there's just a lot of that going on. I also have a question for the group, and this is a little bit for me in getting some background information in setting up a discussion. But I don't know if folks noticed that the speed limit through the Camp Richardson corridor went from 35 to 45. So we inquired about that, and yeah, so the response was essentially that, you know, there was a speed audit done in 2023 because the old one had expired and there was a public meeting and, you know, so just curious about if other folks have, you know, inquired about this, if there was a plan to have a more group discussion about this, if the Forest Service should, we're planning on having some discussions, but just wanted to see, you know.
Yeah, those Caltrans studies are a huge problem. I talked about this with Supervisor Lane last week. I noticed, I think we should try to do something about it. I don't know if we can. Steve probably will tell us the horse left the barn, but maybe we can. Let's fight the power.
I think, Mr. Chairman, it's possible to do something about it. I think John knows a lot about it because this was part of a discussion with the city. So they were going to increase the speed limit in parts of the city. The city pushed back, but because the section of road that you're talking about is not in the city, it's in the county wasn't really involved in those discussions, so it went ahead. And, you know, it would be good to basically make sure that Caltrans is aware of this. There are certain things you can do study-wise to maybe combat that. I think because you have this zero, if you have certain safety plans in place, it's harder for Caltrans to just impose their will on speed limits. So I'm happy to talk offline and be part of a discussion because it's not a good situation, you know. And then I went through there this morning and, you know, people are trying to cross from the ice cream parlor over to, and it's just like a steady. So at any rate, I'd like to think there's something that can be done about it, but it's sure difficult.
Yeah, I'll talk to Supervisor Lane about it again. We weren't notified of that change to my knowledge.
Okay.
So
We may have been, but we were not aware of it, including, you know, like our engineers and stuff. So it was definitely a surprise. And, you know, in some instances, the Forest Service may have a slightly different lever because oftentimes we're actually the underlying landowner. And there's some different things there, but thank you for that discussion and maybe we can have a follow-up afterwards. So thank you.
thanks, Ashley. Robert?
Nothing much, but was there an increase on speed limit at Lake Tahoe Boulevard going into the county also?
No,
Okay, what, is that 60 or 55 now or?
it seems like 60.
Yeah.
I think it is 55 for the 4-lane section.
It's the highest speed limit.
Yeah.
And was that county or does Caltrans have any input on that or?
They have.
Even on non-Caltrans?
They can, and they do enforcement on that road, but it's a county maintained road.
But in terms of changing speed limits, Caltrans, I
Well,
mean, there was a tragic incident there.
right.
And that's, I hadn't realized the speed limit was that high.
Unfortunately, yeah, we did look at, I think in the 2010 timeframe, had a project proposal to reduce those 4 lanes down to 2 and create a bike facility, and held a series of public meetings on that. We got quite a bit of pushback on that because it was post Angora. Supervisor Norma Santiago was really championing that. And we ultimately did not prevail in that plan, but I wish that we would have, so.
But even with that, it's a pretty high speed limit through there. Too high.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I don't know if people are aware, but our executive officer passed away recently, and Ben Linton has now been assigned the executive officer of the water board. So that's official. Yeah, I didn't think I don't know how the word gets out about these things, but we now have a new executive officer, and then they'll be find a position, Ben's position soon.
So Ben's like the interim?
No, he's the permanent. Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry to hear that for Michael. That's terrible. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to follow up on the last discussion, maybe it would be a good opportunity at some point to have a panel discussion on the speed limit stuff. Who has the authority to do things? I've looked at, in fact, you mentioned Norma. Norma was really big on that for a long time, and appropriately so. She got, disappointed every time she tried to do something proactive. But there are quite a few states and other jurisdictions that are successfully pushing back on this speed limit constantly goes up stuff. So I don't know, John, maybe we can have an offline chat about trying to bring a panel discussion. Maybe it's for a joint TRPA governing board APC meeting or something like that. But people need to be armed with what strategies they can pursue to push back on these things. Because if the enemy forces have all the information and the opposition doesn't, they win.
We actually have had some internal discussions.
Yeah,
So yeah,
good.
I think there's something that if the local government passes.
Right.
John probably knows more about this than I do, but I think if they pass some sort of resolution or something.
Which the city did.
The Vision Zero.
Yep.
Safety stuff.
But the agency has a Vision Zero plan too.
Yeah, but I don't know if it requires us or El Dorado County in this particular case. But anyway, we can figure out something.
Thank you. And I was just, Mr. Chairman, going to ask John a quick question relative to the Astor project, Astor Station. It's such nice to see it's all been demoed and it's got all the wattles and all the restoration. But then I saw that the people who were proposing the project decided not to proceed. So what happens there?
So a component of the project, they were proposing improvements in landscaping on a Caltrans parcel. And as part of, and so Caltrans required a maintenance agreement between Caltrans City, and then we required a maintenance agreement between the city and the developer. And the developer wasn't willing to accept the conditions imposed by the state. He felt they were onerous, and so stepped back from the project. So yeah.
Caltrans again. Jeez. Garth.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. First and foremost, I was regrettably not able to attend the meeting last month. Most specifically about the Barton project. I read through all the comments and listened to everything, or read everything from the public, and then all the comments from the APC. And I definitely have some concerns for the project, and I'll be voicing those when the EIS is done, and we move forward. But I really appreciate all the discussion on that last month. That was great. And really nothing else to report. Thank you.
Thanks, Garth. Jason?
I don't have anything, thanks.
All right. Other Jason? No, John?
I'm sure everyone is aware Measure T was found unconstitutional. The city council will be second reading of a new VHR ordinance next Tuesday. So VHR short-term rentals are coming back. But the Measure T folks were granted standing, and my guess is they will appeal. So stay tuned.
Wow. Yeah. Roller coaster ride. Nothing is certain.
Has the city increased staffing for hired people for VHR purposes?
The plan is to hire additional community service officers. The permitting has moved from development services over to the police department.
Thanks, John. Going online, Mr. Young, anything to share? He might not be there. Looks like we lost
No, I'm
everyone.
here. I just couldn't get unmuted.
Got it.
No, I don't have anything, but thanks again for another great meeting. Appreciate today.
All right, great. Thanks, Eric. Nothing for me other than, yeah, our hearts have just been really heavy in our county with the tragic passing of Giada. So it's been a really hard few days for our community down here on the South Shore. So it's awful. Okay, well, thank you all for sharing. I'm going to move us now to item 7, public interest comments. This again is for members of the public who would like to address the Advisory Planning Commission. We'll go to the room first and then online. Just a reminder to raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen or dial *9 on your telephone to make a comment. And we are prohibited by law from taking action on any items not on our agenda. I don't see anyone in the room, so Catherine will go to any members of the public who wish to address the APC online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are no hands raised online to comment.
Okay, great, thank you. And that takes us to item 8, which is adjournment. May I please have a motion to adjourn? So moved by Steve.
Second.
We have a second by Jason, and I assume everyone says aye, so we stand adjourned right at 12:30. Well done. Thanks for helping us to get out of here. Great meeting, and see you all in July.